Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey folks, welcome to episode 280 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, and our guest on tonight's show is a much requested person that our viewers have wanted us to have on here for quite a while. We're really happy to have Robert Young Pelton on the show. Robert is a conflict journalist. He is the author of The Hunter, The Hammer in Heaven, License to Kill, The World's Most Dangerous Places, numerous other books about the places he's gone. I mean, he's kind of notorious for traveling to all the danger zones of the world and coming out of them with some really interesting stories. These books had a big influence on me in my life and kind of colored the direction that I went in. So we're really happy to have him on the show and hear about some of his adventures and some of his life experiences. And I just first off want to tell you guys about our Patreon. If you guys would consider subscribing to our Patreon, the link's down in the description. $5 a month gets you all of these episodes ad-free and keeps the show running. So we really appreciate all you guys that are subscribers. And you can find the link down in the description. So Robert, welcome to the show, man.
Nice to see you, Jack.
Yeah, good to see you, man. So this has been a long time coming. Let's start at the beginning, to give people a little bit of a sense of who you are, and because you've written about it too. I mean, I think it would be great to start with a little bit about your upbringing and your early introductions into survivalism.
Or lack thereof, right? So I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, which is a long way from anywhere. And I went to a school, and by the time I was in grade 2, I was kicked out of school, and I didn't bother doing any work or any exercises. And my teacher told my mother very politely that I was retarded. So that was the beginning of my education. And the principal, God bless her, thought, well, he's sitting there reading all these books. And I was reading the Odyssey by Homer. I was reading all the Hardy Boy books, 1 through whatever, 100. So they sent me off to a university to have a bunch of tests. And these tests were in front of a two-way mirror with guys with white coats. And it was rather odd. Anyways, they went back and they said, no, he's not retarded. He's actually pretty smart. So that was, sort of the beginning of my experience with learning things. I was not in a traditional school. So I was immediately elevated to grade 9. I don't know what age I was, probably 9 years old. I passed grade 9, and then they said, okay, we got to do something. So they got me a university scholarship, and they said, that's kind of a joke. It'll be a freak show. So they picked a school that was advertising itself as being a school with an advanced curriculum and a very serious outdoor program. And you did chores, you were on the cooking, you did laundry, whatever. It was called St. John's Cathedral Boys' School. And I was the youngest student there at the time. And I started at grade 6. And what was interesting was years later, I was doing a press tour in Canada, and some journalist said, oh, you went to that prison school? And I'm like, what? It's a prison school. I was like, oh, no, it was an adventure school. I said, no, that was where judges used to send juvenile defenders instead of jail. So, we canoed 1,000 miles every year. We did snowshoe runs after school, 10, 15 miles. We did snowshoe races that were up to 50 miles. We raised animals, we slaughtered them, we sold them door to door. I studied Latin, ancient Greek. I spoke Voyager, French. I can go on. Anyway, what the school's famous for is actually killing 12 of its kids. And, I'm like the world's worst guy when I say, oh, when I was a kid, we used to head off into the wilderness on snowshoes in the dark, because there wasn't much light there, with nothing, no water, no first aid kit, nothing. And on one of the school trips, they got another sort of famous mention because they were the first person to bring back a kid from the dead. He'd been dead for a few hours. And thank God they brought him into a hospital where a doctor had actually studied bringing hypothermic and dead kids back that fell through the ice. So it was a strange school, and it doesn't run anymore. But that was the beginning, and I got out of there in sort of 1968. You know, the Flower Power, Summer of Love, all that kind of stuff. And I was this completely tanned kid with a brush cut that only wore golf shirts and jeans, and didn't listen to music. I didn't know anything. I'm coming out of prison. So it was. I mean, when people say, "Well, what's it like going into a war zone?" I'm like, oh, that's not that bad. You know, the food's pretty good. I don't have to work all the time. Anyway, so that's my early upbringing.
And after prison school, you found yourself in a career in advertising for a good period of your life, it sounds like, and fairly successful at it. Tell us a little bit about that period of your life and how you transitioned into becoming, essentially a conflict journalist. I mean, it's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, and you kind of have to go slow because you don't end up being a retard kid and then end up being a conflict journalist. But I sort of had a great high school. I started the outdoors club. I was really interested in high school because I was actually socializing with normal people. And then when I was 16, because I was younger than everybody, my mother told me I was leaving, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. What am I going to do? And I said, I don't care. So I lived in a pink Rambler station wagon, and I picked fruit. I was basically homeless, but I would tell people I was traveling. And when I was in high school, I took an aptitude test, and they said the three things I'd be good at were astronaut, which in Canada doesn't take you very far, adventurer, which was not a job, and advertising man, which I didn't know what that was, but I thought I'll remember that. So after I got tired of being homeless, I drove to Toronto, and I literally called every name in the phone book, starting with the A. And if it was a guy named Abercrombie, I asked for Mr. Abercrombie, and they'd say, no, he's been dead for 30 years. Well, who's the president? I want to talk to him. So three of those presidents actually talked to me and said, wow, you got guts, kid. So problem is you're too young, right? You don't know that much. So I found a guy who said, look, why don't you go work as a mail boy? And you can start from the bottom, from the mailroom. And I went to the mailroom. They said, what do you know about delivering mail? And I said, nothing. So I got a job with a mail boy at Merrill Lynch, went back to the ad agency, said, okay, I've had 6 months experience. They hired me. The next day I go into the creative director's office and I say, okay, make me a copywriter. And it's like, whoa, slow down, kid. So, but by 17, I was a copywriter. And when I say copywriter, you write the headlines above the pictures and you do the body copy. And it's interesting work. You got to be creative. Well, anyway, so after about 6 months, a year of doing that, I became very good friends with a guy named Bob McAleer, who was the executive vice president. And we used to hang out at night and chain smoke. And he started working when he was 19. And he said to me, he said, Pelton, you're good at what you do, but you're a kid. You don't know anything. You don't know anything about customers. You don't know anything about products. You don't know anything, right? He said, why don't you get out there and see the world? Because, he had started working when he was 19. He had a bunch of kids and became a business guy, and he's never really had that time. He said, take this time, use it. So I took a leave of absence. I traveled around the world. I worked in Australia. I got kind of bored of traveling because it's just a bunch of guys hitchhiking and, people sitting in youth hostels and things that look just like they're out of postcards. But I enjoyed Australia. I went back, and after about a year, I went back and I said, okay, where's my job? And who are you? And I was like, oh, I'm Robert Pelton. And I used to work for Bob McAleer. So he's dead. I'm like, holy shit. He was about 55 at the time. They said that McAleer, who was a devout Roman Catholic, had a PhD in theology of all things. After I left his wife and kids, went to Spain, bought a beret, put an earring in, and had a monkey and wrote poetry at a cafe for a few months. And then took the earring out, sold the monkey, went back to his wife and kids, and had a heart attack and died. And I thought, holy shit, that's a life lesson right there. So, to condense the part about business, which is boring, is I was very good at what I did. I moved to the States on one of those chicken sexers and hockey players' visas. I started working with people like Steve Jobs. I helped people start businesses like the Upper Deck Card Company. I made a lot of people a lot of money, and it was fun, right? And I drove a silver Rolls Royce. I had $1,600 suits. I had a 10,000 square foot office with my name on it. I was on the Inc. 500. I think I was number 146 or something like that. And I couldn't have had a better, my last job, I got paid $500,000 a year from Marvel just to answer the phone, if they had a question or something. So I was like the guru, the marketing guru. And I remembered that I worked as a copywriter for a guy named Stan Cates, and his wife demanded that he took a month off. And he was a workaholic. And he used to chain smoke, and he's a nice guy, worked really hard, but everything was, had to do this, had to do this. So he would leave, and when he would come back, he was like Zen-like. He was calm, he was tanned, he wasn't smoking as much, he could focus more. And I learned from that as well. I said, you need to take that time off. So I used to take a month off, and I'd pick the most remote part on the map, and I would go there. And sometimes these are expeditions, sometimes they're competitions like the Camel Trophy. Sometimes I drive around the entire island of Borneo because it hadn't been done before. And I'd bring journalists along, and they would make fun of me as a dilettante. And they'd say, well, yeah, fine, you can go to Borneo, you can go to Africa, whatever, but try going to places like Afghanistan or the Congo or Burma where they want to kill you, right? I'm like, what does that mean? He said, well, that's real adventure. Like what you're doing now is like what dilettantes do, right? And it's fun, but it's like camping. And I'm like, you're right. I mean, nobody's trying to kill me, but I'm having fun. And I said, well, where should I go? So my first trip was to Eastern Turkey because somebody wanted to interview this warlord who tried to kill the Pope. So I said, okay. So I went there, met the guy. He had no idea why I was there. I had no idea what to ask him. And I remember we went out for a shooting contest, and there's a little guy named Sadat Buchak. So his bodyguard threw the Pepsi can in the air, and he took his 45 and he missed it. And then they threw it up for me, and I hit it. And that was kind of embarrassing. So the bodyguard went over to Buchak's can and shot it. And I learned another lesson at that point. So I was intrigued, right? But I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't writing about it. I wasn't doing films. I was just doing it. And then I would call journalists. So you want to interview this guy? Sure. So I went to Afghanistan to meet with the Taliban when they took over Kabul back in the mid-90s, right? Mm-hmm. And again, I mean, I marvel at why I'm still alive, but basically I went all over Pakistan looking for the Taliban and found out that my guide was a drug dealer and he wasn't taking me anywhere near anybody related to the Taliban. So I ditched him and I called a local journalist because I noticed that there was a story about the Taliban in the local Peshawar press. And he said, oh, they're in the smuggler's market. You go down there, you bang on the door, ask any kid. They'll say, they'll take you right to the Taliban. So I did that, and I banged on this door, and the steel gates opened up, and there's all these horribly wounded young men, with turbans, and they kind of look like farm kids, and there's blood-soaked blankets everywhere. And I go up the stairs, and I remember there's a whole bunch of little cheap sandals lined up there. So I take my hiking boots off, and I meet this guy with a big turban. He's got an old 1930s pistol and a leather belt with little bullets in it. And he's very polite. He speaks English, and he says, how can I help you? And I said, well, I want to understand the Taliban. I don't know what you are. I don't know what you're doing. I've never heard of students driving tanks, taking over countries. So I just want to hang out and figure out what you're doing. He said, oh, well, we don't have any propaganda to give you. And I said, no, I just want to hang out. I don't want to read something. And I said, take pictures, and I'll bring some friends. We'll set up an interview with the mullahs and blah, blah, blah. I said, no. In our religion, it's haram, to show our faces. And I said, well, no, it's like the loudspeaker on the mosque, except it's a camera. You can talk to more people and you can explain what you're doing to people. And like, no, it's against Islam. We're not to show a face. And I said, well, then you're just like a bunch of women hiding behind a burqa. And this guy's just like silence in the room. And he says, well, I understand what you're saying. I will go to Kabul and I will hold a shura with the leaders, the mullahs, and I'll ask them a question. So he does that, and they say, sure, you can do it. So I call up. I said, there's one problem is I'm not a Muslim, so I can't do the actual interviews. So I call a friend of mine who's a Muslim, and I say, hey, you want to interview the Taliban? He said, sure. So he brings his camera and he interviews the Taliban, and he gets to Mullah Omar, who theoretically has never been interviewed. And Mullah Omar is got one eye sewed shut, right? And he's kind of self-conscious about it. And he says, you cannot film me And then he tries that shit that I pulled back in Peshawar. He said, well, you know, the path to your heart, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, no, no. The path to my heart is through my voice. So you can record my voice, but you can't record my face. So he has a voice recording, right? So at that point, these journalists were like, Jesus Christ, this guy's either an idiot or he's like a genius. Like, how does he do this? And I was enjoying doing this, right? I really, I mean, the time I spent with the Taliban was very interesting. I went up to the front lines and we sat there and got shelled. And I write about it in my book, The Adventurers.
Did you have some conception at this point in time? Like, did you have a job, or were you hoping to write a book, or thinking you could pitch this to like Reuters or something down the line? I mean, I'm just curious what your thought process was.
This is my vacation. This is my 1 month that I take off to relax and reconnect with the world, right? This is not any kind of business venture. But I do start feeling pangs of guilt because a lot of people are going through a lot of effort, you know, to get me to the front lines and show me this and show me that. And I had a series of deaths, beginning with one of my clients was playing racquetball and he got hit in the shoulder. And the doctor said, look, you got bone cancer. You got a few months to live. And his name was Bob Mobilia, really beautiful man, really nice, good friend of mine. And he died very quickly. And my father was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. And again, you know, he had a few months to live. And they were in their late 50s. I was in my early 40s, you know. And I started thinking, and I was saying, okay, I have everything. You know, I was a poor kid. I was started from nothing. I work all the time. I have everything. But I don't enjoy these things. I don't, you know, I don't want to be doing this 10 years from now. I want to be doing something that people with silver hair have. Back then I didn't have silver hair, I was a skunk bitch. So I thought, well, I'll be a publisher. So I bought a publishing company from William Morrow called the Fielding Travel Guides. And I started revamping the travel guides. And one of the books I always wanted to write was World's Most Dangerous Places, which to me was a book you actually need. If you're going to a place where they're trying to kill you, you probably should have a guidebook. If you're going to Paris or Hawaii, I don't think you need a guidebook, right? So this was just before the internet. So I couldn't find anybody to write this book. I called people. I said, hey, you know, you're in the CIA, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to fucking war zones writing a book. You're crazy. So I started writing it. And because you know, I'm kind of like a Forrest Gump, you know, I just decided to go to those places and interview everybody and talk about it and then condense it into a book. And so I wrote this book. It's huge. It was 1,000 pages. And it was boring. And I thought, you know, nobody's going to read this. And so I wrote it again, but funny, like in my voice, right? Like the way that I'm telling a story to somebody. And you remember this was before wokeness, right? So basically I'm insulting every person on every side in every country about every sort of ethnic, religious, whatever thing you could. But it was incredibly readable. And in the first year I published it, and remember, I'm a publisher. I'm doing 50 books a year. So I sold 100,000 copies. I updated it about 6 months later. I sold another 100,000. I updated the next year. I did about another 100,000. And then I thought, wow. And I got a call from Microsoft, and they had heard that I databased. I was tired with the way people write travel guides, so I created a database system. So everything had to be the same, and then there was ratings for how romantic it was or how scenic, whatever. And I'd created a database system so I could generate these books, and I could cross-generate them, like most romantic places in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. And they were setting up a site called Expedia, right? So they wanted content. And I had also done a business plan about how to monetize transactions, because I simply thought, well, if I got a travel guide, why don't I sell tickets, right? Like if I like this cruise ship, I like this hotel, why can't I just sell tickets and monetize it? But I didn't have the brains or the time for that. So they said, no, we'll just pay you lots of money and you just give us all that content. I said, fine. I give them a hard drive. I also leased the data to IBM and all kinds of people. And then I thought, you know, this is my ripcord right here. This is my emergency sheet. So I kept World's Most Dangerous Places. And I said to myself, I'm going to be the brand, you know, and we're talking 1993, something like that. So if I can make other people millions of dollars by selling whatever widgets or baseball cards or computers, I'm sure I can do just fine. So within about 6 months, ABC News was doing a big special on me about being a solo journalist and traveling around the world, and of which I was probably the original solo journalist. I had a TV series, a series of specials, with Discovery. And I was everywhere because I was like, oh, this guy goes to war zones on his vacation. Isn't that funny? But it was a book read by a lot of real people. And as you probably know, the agency made it required reading. It was soldiers were issued it. I mean, it was cool that it was helpful to people. So by the mid 90s, I was basically doing this as a job.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no segue there. I'm just saying. So I had this book. I had to update it. I had this series of documentaries, and I had to put out product. And honestly, I don't know if you know what it's like commuting to war zones, but when I got kidnapped in Colombia, I had a film crew waiting for me in Texas, ready to start my next show because I was doing a quick Nat Geo.
I remember that.
Piece. Yeah, my idea, like I went to Liberia, right? And I was surrounded by Charles Taylor's people, really gory. You can see it's called Inside Liberia, Black something. And I was surrounded with the lured rebels. And, after one battle, my gunboy gives me a severed head. And I mean, it's just weird. It's like, whoa, they're eating things and killing things. And everybody was saying, man, you're tweaked. You're going out, you're getting all this stuff, and it doesn't shock you. It doesn't, affect you. Well, it's just what I do, right? I'm documenting what they do. I don't have any part in this war. I'm just getting it on film. Anyways, and so my wife got mad at me, and she said, "You need to do a camping and a hiking show because you work for National Geographic and you work for Discovery. So you need to tell them I'm not doing no war stuff. I'm doing hiking and camping." And I didn't have the heart to explain to her that it doesn't work that way. But I go to my editor at National Geographic Adventure and I said, look, I'm in a doghouse, man. I need to do like a hiking story or something, And she goes, what do you think? I said, I don't know. I said, when I was 19, I hitchhiked all the way down through Central America, through all the wars. And I was going to hike the Darien Gap. And I met people and they said, no, you don't want to do that. And then I looked at this little island and I thought, which hike through the jungle for like 10 days or go to this tropical island? And so I said, I'll go to this tropical island. So I didn't chicken out, but I had no interest in hiking the Darien. So I said, what if I go back and I hike the Darien? And I'll go find some young kids about my age at that time, and we'll talk about adventure. Like I'll be the burnt out adventure guy, and I'll be talking to these young adventure people. And I met two 26-year-olds who were going to hike the Darien Gap. I didn't realize till later they had no intention of doing it, but they figured, oh, Pelton's doing it. I'll go with him. And 2 days in, there was an ambush. They killed, 3 or 4 Indians, cut their heads off and disemboweled them or whatever. And there was gunfire in the jungle, and I had these 2 kids with me, and I was like, son of a bitch, right? Like, I'm trying to take a vacation, and I'm in a war. So I said to them, look, we got 3 options here. 1, we turn around and walk, but whoever's killing those people is going to find us. Number 2, we just kind of, you go this way, I'll go that way. And whoever gets caught, too bad. Whoever escapes, that's great. Or I'm going to walk into the ambush. And I feel more comfortable walking into the ambush because then I have control over where these people are. Now, I knew both the leaders of the FARC and the death squads, right? The AUC. So Carlos Castaño, I'd set up an interview for him. The FARC, I'd interviewed all the FARC leaders. I had shitty Spanish. And I said, I'm just going to walk into so I said, everybody stay 50 to 100 yards apart and just talk really loud in English because I'm pretty sure it's the death squads because we'd already met the FARC, right? And I said, when they start shooting, just whatever way I roll, you roll the other way, right? And then as soon as you get out of their sight, just run like hell and just run downhill towards the ocean, right? And just follow a creek, whatever. So we're talking and they keep bunching up. And I'm like, no, this is really fucking serious. You have to go back there. And they jump us. And they're like, hands up, get on the ground, drop your backpack, like all these different things. They're all sweaty because they just shot these Indians, right? And I could see it says right there, AUC on their gear, right? Ernest Cardenza Blocky, BEC, which is the old one. And I'm like, okay, fucking death squads. Okay, well, at least I can say, Carlos, my buddy Carlos. But we're deep in the jungle. and their radios don't reach, and so they're just screaming at us. And so they want to kill my guy. And I'm like, no, he's an old man. You can't kill him because you'll be in trouble. And I'm talking like I can do something, you know? And so they don't kill him. And so we're held there at, gunpoint. Then the commander comes up, Commander Roberto, and he's got his fucking T-shirt on backwards. And these other guys come out, and they all got their like skulls and shit. They're all inside out. And they're like, he gets up on a little thing. And he says, "We're the FARC, and we are fighting for the people, and we defend the base." And I said, "Oh, fuck, this is not good. This is not good at all." So I told the Mark, who actually spoke Spanish, I said, "Do not speak Spanish. Do not say a fucking word. Like, just look stupid like me. Just smile, right?" And they make this speech, and I'm like, fine, whatever, FARC, AUC, I don't give a shit. So there's 176 of these guys, right? They all march past us, and they go down into Panama because they're going to go fuck up the Indians, right? Because they think they're smuggling weapons, right? And we get led at gunpoint. And so they take us from place to place, to gunpoint. And they take us to this just incredible secret hideout with like boulders and butterflies and waterfalls. And I'm like, I can't believe this, right? I can't believe this in the middle of the jungle, just north of, Colombia. And Mark gets sweet on this fucking rebel girl. And I'm like, oh, God. So this rebel girl, she's like 15, and she goes, "Hey, is he married?" I was like, no, yeah, he's married. Yeah, don't touch him. Stay away from him. So he's like hitting on her, and then they make a fucking little, excuse my French, they make a little campsite on the middle of this boulder for everybody to see with the waterfalls on each side. And I'm like, we're going to die. And they put out little candles like it's some kind of commercial for like a romance vacation. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm in on these people. Because normally I take care of myself, right? I don't have a lot of...
Anti-Dalmatian.
Hi, Sylvie. And I was really worried. And then what happened, I heard this like crack, like a rifle bolt, right? And one of the guys like, "Get your ass," to the girl, "Get your ass out of there." So I kept saying like, just act stupid. Just like, do not, like, be nice, but don't be nice, So anyways, they march us at gunpoint at night, which is not fun in the jungles and the mountains, because those big spines on the, I had one that went right through my hand, like, these bamboo things with spines around them. Anyways, we get to Colombia, and they put us in this soccer field, and there's like 5 guys in each corner of the soccer field. They're older guys, and they have their weapons pointed at us, and they like put us in the middle under a tarp, and they go like, "Okay, sleep." So we're just sitting there going, things are not working out very well. And I keep saying, "Carlos, he's my friend. Give him a call." And in the morning, like 4 a.m., they kick us, and they make us cross a river, and we go into a graveyard. And I'm like, oh, this is not going to work out well. So I'm sitting there, and they come and they get Mark, the guy that speaks Spanish. And they walk away, and I don't hear any gunshots, disappears. And then they come back to the girl. And I say, I'll go with her. I'll go first. You don't need to take her. I said, we'll go together. So we walk along, and I keep pretending like I got to tie my shoe up, like, oh, I got to take a piss, I got to do this. And it didn't seem stressful. They weren't worried that we weren't catching up. But anyway, we turn a corner. There's a bunch of old guys. When I say old guys, 40, 50. And they're all got horses with big, beautiful silver saddles, and they're laughing their asses off. And on the ground is Mark, who's chain smoking, and he doesn't smoke. And he's like, "Robert, they're not going to kill us. They're not going to kill us." And I said, "Well, what the fuck has been going on here?" So it turns out that they told him that FARC story again. So they brought Mark in. They said, "What do you think of the AUC? They're murdering bastards. They're murdering bastards." And like, okay, well, what do you think of the FARC? "Oh, they're fighting for the people and everything." And the guy does this thing, and he's got this giant skull and crossbones, and it says AUC Beck. And Mark, for the first time, realizes that we're with the death squad. So I'm like, oh, what an idiot. Anyways, they're all laughing and happy, like, "Hey, we're just having fun with you guys." And then they take us, one of the most beautiful horse rides I've ever had. We ride towards the city, or what we think is the city. And then at the last minute, we turn left, and we're like, "Whoa, wait, we're good. We're the city down there. And they take us to this deserted ranch, which has these shallow pits with barbed wire on them. And I'm like, what the hell are those, right? And we're there, and I'm like, oh, we're kidnapped. We're not going anywhere. So I build a dam. I make like a whole set of cutlery out of bamboo. And after like 2 days, they come and they said, oh, our leader's coming. You're going to interview him. And I'm like, I'm not interviewing anybody. Like he said, no, wait. So this guy named Alaman, Commander Alaman, he said, not like the Nazis. Not like I'm just like to be on time. That's why they call me Alaman. He says, okay, you can interview me now. And he's got this big fat guy with him. He's got a giant Red Cross T-shirt, and he said, "This is our human rights director." And I'm like, "It's a fucking despot. I have a human rights director." And the irony of this, after being marched to the jungle for 10 days, is a little much. And they took all our gear, right? But they gave it back to me, right? And I'd been snapping pictures with a little camera that I snuck. Anyway. He's like, ask us about our human rights policy. And I'm like, okay, so chainsaws or rocks? Which one is it? Like, how do you decide whether you're going to smash somebody's head in or cut it off with a chainsaw? And they weren't amused, but I was just like, fuck you. It's just like, I've been in the jungle eating sardines and rice. Well, anyways, so I do this pathetic interview, which I didn't even bother taking notes. And then they all line up at this ranch. And they all kind of laugh and shake our hands and pat me on the back and, thumbs up and whatever. And they disappear into the jungle. And then this Roman Catholic priest shows up with 2 workers, and they take us into town. So, I mean, that was my experience, taking a vacation and not doing war zone stuff.
I mean, how did you end up like getting released? What was the end game?
Well, what? So here's what's happened. So Carlos Castaño was in a peace talks meeting with the government, because the AUC are, right-wing representatives of ranchers, and they actually go in and kill the FARC. And I'd spent lots of time watching them kill people in these little towns, and vice versa. The FARC also kills the AUC. And the group that got us went down into this Indian village where we had actually traveled through, killed the chief and his son in a very gruesome manner. That hit the headlines. They then, when they finally got a hold of Carlos, he's like, oh, fuck, Robert Pelton, is it? Yeah. So they issued a press release saying I was being held for my safety so I wouldn't be kidnapped by the FARC. And when I got into Rwanda, there was 3 aircraft waiting for me. There was one from the State Department, there was one from CNN, and there's one from the police, right? And the police were so nice. I mean, if you ever get kidnapped in Colombia, because the police know how to deal with everything. They cleared the square and they bought me breakfast, which is like one of the sweetest things, because they know exactly, you're decompressing from this thing. And they give you great medical care. State Department, not so much. These little guys with the blue short sleeve shirts from Sears show up, and they're just pissed at me, right? Because they had to do something, and I'm like, I don't want to go with you. I want to go with the CNN because there's booze in that one. And I don't want to be with a bunch of State Department guys, but the police begged me to go with the State Department. And they basically held us for an entire day in their little embassy, fortress embassy. And I said, look, I just want a nice warm bed. I just want a good steak. I just want a nice drink. I just want to just like decompress after this experience. And, I said, do not let these people talk you into anything. Like, I'm not anti-American, but what they were doing is they were trying to get us to charge the AUC with murder, right? By testifying. And I said, there's going to be a little man with a chainsaw show up in your door, and the U.S. government is not going to be there to protect you. I said, do not mess with the AUC. And so they took my advice, and I said, look, I'm happy to press kidnapping charges, but at the end of the day, it's their war. We were battlefield detainees, blah, 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 just let it go. But with the Indians, like, that needs justice, right? These guys went down to murder these people. They weren't interested in that. They just wanted me as an American to press charges. So, and I didn't want to get involved in that, because Carlos would come to my house with a chainsaw. He's dead. Anyway, bottom line is that I blame my wife for that. And when I got back, oh my God, talk about a media thing, right? And I was going to bring a photographer named Scott on the initial trip, but National Geographic was too cheap to hire him. So he went and got another gig for the LA Times, and he got kidnapped on that gig right after we got released. but by the ELN, which is another left-wing
Yeah,
group, but it's
yeah,
not the
yeah.
FARC. So he came back to LA, and I said, dude, you are the only person on earth that had 100% chance of being kidnapped. And that was his claim to fame.
You know, before we get into some of the, like the post 9/11 stuff, I'd really like to touch on your time in Chechnya as well. I mean, in this book, there's a terrific segment about your experiences. You know, kind of smuggling yourself into Chechnya and being in Grozny during like one of the huge battles. Can you tell us like when this was, how this trip came about, and how you started to make your way into Russia?
Yeah. Well, they didn't call it Russia back then. So within a very short period of time, I was the guy you called if something needed to be done, right? And there were a lot of people that were kidnapped, a lot of people that wanted my advice on this and that. And, you know, I helped out. And one guy reached out to me. His name was Akil Collins, or Akai Collins, depending on how you pronounce it, but he calls himself Akil. And he wanted me to bring out his wife and kids from Chechnya. And the Russians had started to invade the country. Like if Chechnya is sort of the last country in Europe in the mountains before Georgia, right? It's a beautiful place, very rugged, but it's full of Chechens. It's not full of Russians, right? And at that time, he had fought there in the first war. So this was 2009. There was a war. There was an invasion in 2004 by the Russians. The Chechens won, right? So the Russians pulled back, and he was a jihadi. He was trained in the camps in same place as John Walker Lindh, you know, bin Laden's camp. He actually used to arm wrestle with the guy that cut Daniel Pearl's head off. I mean, it's just terrible pedigree, right? But he was a jihadi, and he was an American. He had a red beard. And he was stupid, right? He was just, I think he was a sociopath. He liked to kill people. And
his book, I remember reading, I think it's My Jihad. I mean, it's a pretty crazy read.
I got his second book, which never got published. It's even worse. I mean, I think he wanted to die, but it's a long story. But the bottom line is that at that time, I didn't know any of this. This guy was an American. He worked with the CIA. He worked with the FBI. He was an informant. He wanted me to go in and get his wife out. I said, well, I'm going anyway, so you can come with me, right? And he goes to the mosque. He gets $5,000 or something, buys a bunch of gear. And he's got one leg, by the way. That's the key part of the story here. So he's got this titanium leg that they made him for free, and he kind of hops along. And we have to get into Chechnya, and it's not like you can just drive there. You got to go over the mountains in Georgia. So the main gateway was through Istanbul, and Istanbul's where I end up a lot of times going in to meet terrorists. Right? They're all based in that region, and they use these charities, you know, Islamic charities. So I met with the Islamic charity. I explained what I wanted to do. That I was going to go in, I was going to document the war, and then I was going to come out, and I might bring out his wife and kids. And they're like, okay, fine, but you need to get permission from the Chechens. I said, well, who are you? He said, we're just a charity that brings in Qurans. And they're like, okay. So I meet with the Chechens, and I remember that meeting was a little tiny room. This guy, everybody's chain smoking, sitting in this little room. This guy's kind of feeling me out, like, why do you want to go to Chechnya? I said, well, I want to document the war. You know, they can Google who I was or figure out who I am. And these three guys come storming in, boom, boom, boom. They all got leather jackets. They got those little wool hats, you know, just go straight up like stovepipes. And they go, okay, this is Commander so-and-so. And the commander looks at me and says, do you want to go to Chechnya or Grozny? Do you want to go to Grozny? I said, yes, I do. He said, okay, I will make you one promise and one promise only. He said, you will not die until the last of my men have died. Is that agreed to? I said, yes, okay, let's go. And then he said, oh, wait, you got to talk to the mafia. So then I met with the Georgian mafia, and same thing. They just want to know, and they said, okay, when you get to Georgia, go to this hotel and meet with this guy. And I said, why? Just do it. And that way they know you're with us, right? I said, fine. And then they're like, you have to meet with bin Laden's people. And I'm like, okay. Now, I knew bin Laden's people from back in the day, right? And they ran a website, and I was down the road from him in Jalalabad. So I meet with this guy, in London in a bookstore. And he asked me, you know, who are you? What are you doing? And I told him, and he said, yeah, I know exactly who you are. And I said, oh, okay, well, then why do you bother asking? He said, well, I just want to know. And he said, you know, I've read your book. And I'm like, oh, he said 80% of what you write there is true. I said, fuck you, 100% is true. He said, no, 80% is good. It's good. So I got their blessing because I would be traveling with jihadi groups, right? So you got the mob, you got the Chechens, and then you got a subgroup of jihadis in the Chechens. So it's a mess. Anyways, so I end up going to Georgia, and then it takes a while, but we get smuggled over the mountains. And there's people coming out, like there's little kids walking out in like 3 feet of snow. And it's like, holy shit, things look bad. So I go in, and the first night we're there, we're in this gorge, this mountain gorge, and there's this hole, and I go through these pine trees that are covering the hole, and I literally fall like 3 feet into a pit. And I'm like, fuck. And they're all laughing, and like, I should have turned left, but I turned right. And they're like, Robert, come. And like, everybody knew who I was. And I'm like, okay, so much for sneaking into Chechnya, right? And these jihadis were all, I don't know if they're soldiers, jihadi, whatever, anyway, they all got beards. And they all knew exactly who I was, which freaked me out because we're talking 1999 in the remote mountain hill. Anyway, so we had to leave there before the sun came up because the Russians would bomb. So there's these little tiny ladas, right? So there's mad dash to get a seat in a car, and like somebody throws like an AK-47 in, and somebody throws it out, and he grabs the seat, and then somebody throws an ammo, and then the other guy gets kicked out. And so I just sit in the back seat. They just start throwing rifles at me and ammo, and I got about 200 pounds of just stuff on top of me, so they can't throw me out. And we start driving, and it's nighttime in the mountains, and it's icy, and just got these little headlights. And I had two drivers, and all they said was, Allahu Akbar. And the other guy goes, Allahu Akbar. And then this little guy who I couldn't see, he was going, Allahu Akbar. And then they had to teach me Chechen, which is impossible. Like, nobody knows how to speak Chechen except Chechens, right? And they would ask me questions, and they'd say, was it, so-and-so good? I said, I don't know, good, no, bad. I said, okay, he's good. So anyway, we're driving. So I fell asleep, and I woke up, and there was gunfire all around. I mean, it was just like, oh shit, we're being ambushed, right? And I look outside, and there's like sparks coming off the road, and there's people running around in the headlights, and they're firing their guns, and there's this rabbit running around, and they're literally trying to shoot this rabbit in front of the car. And I'm like waking up, going, what the hell's going on? They literally got out of the car and then let off like 2 magazines on this rabbit, and they didn't kill it. So then I think, okay, I better pay attention. So we're driving in, and then we get to the city above Grozny. You can see Grozny down below. And these Scuds come in. You know, the Scud's a big missile, and it's full of fuel, right? And when they hit, you see the explosion, and it's like a dirty yellow thing. It's like a big boom. And then you feel the boom, you know, like the explosion of this thing. And they were dropping these damn things on the civilian areas, right? And you could see like these trails of flames, you could hear the, you know, shelling, whatever. And there's all these guys walking around like it's a college frat party, like, hey, Allahu Akbar, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they're all walking down to fight in Grozny. So we get down there, and we're in a safe house. Well, they call it a safe house. It's just a house, right? And we meet with a commander, and they keep saying to me, don't get kidnapped, don't get kidnapped. I said, no, I'm cool. They're not going to kidnap. I met with bin Laden's people. I'm cool. He said, no, you don't understand. There's criminals here. And I'm like, oh, shit, there's criminals as well as jihadis, as well as terrorists. I said, okay. So they gave me a Krinkov, right? You know, a little tiny AK the tankers had with a little flare muzzle on it. And every time we'd park or go someplace, and these people would walk up and they'd stick their head in the window, and I'd go like this, and they'd all pull their head out, and they're like, so the idea was that I was worth a lot of money, right, to anybody who wanted to take me. And so we stay in the commander's house, and every night they have these grad barrages, and I sleep like a baby in wars. This is a terrible thing. But they sound like a giant walking, because they come like down the street like boom, boom, boom. They make like a double bang, right? And I get up in the morning, and there's houses missing on the street, and I slept through it, right? The second night, the same thing. So we go out during the day, and we, you know, take pictures of the bombing. We meet these old Russian people that have been bombed, and it's, you know, it's a really sad war, because it's the Russians basically demolishing the cities before they come in. And I think it's the third night or something, fourth night. We're just sitting there hanging around, and this guy walks up, a big guy with a beard, and he's wearing Arab dress, and he's got a red keffiyeh, and he goes, "You come with me." And I look at the commander like, is it a fucking Arab in Grozny? He said, "Just go with him, go with him." He looked kind of nervous. I said, "Oh, okay." So I grabbed my cameras and everything. I get in the back seat, and it's like, Jesus, this is a freaking Toyota pickup truck in Chechnya, right? And there's all this radio stuff in the back. So he's talking to me in Arabic, and I don't speak Arabic. So he puts in a tape, it's that boy singing tape, like, they're reading the Quran, and off we go, right? And they shell the shit out of Grozny at night. And he doesn't care. He's just driving away. And he takes us on this tour of nuclear bunkers. And all the real guys are in these bunkers, like that they built in the 50s. They're not in houses. Only stupid guys stay in houses. So I go down and I interview all these people. Like the guy was in charge of sewers. He tells me about their tactics with the tanks, blah, blah, blah. And the last stop is the head of intel for the Chechens, is Abu Masayef. He's a terrorist, right? And he says, "Okay, you can talk to me, but you can't write anything down. You can't take my picture. You can't do this." I said, "Fuck you, I'll take your picture. Here, yeah, come here. I just want to take a picture," right? He says, "You have been photographed with a terrorist now." So he said, "I want you to meet somebody." And he says, "You can't ask him any questions. Can't take his picture." And I said, "Do you think I came all the way here just for like a petting zoo?" So again, maybe one question. So, and at that time, I was working with CNN, and I had a CNN cameraman with me. He was a Turkish guy. So they bring out this guy, and he's like this kind of skinny, sweaty guy, and he looks like he hasn't bathed for a few days, and he's got a little, like maybe 5 or 6 days growth. And he says, "This is a spy we captured, a Russian spy." And I said, "Okay, what's his name?" He says, "Alexei Galkin." And I said, "Okay, hi, Alexei." He said, "Alexei, how are you?" He said, "No questions." I said, "I'm going to ask him fucking questions." So I said, "How are they treating you?" He said, fine. Okay. So, "Well, how long have you been here?" I said, "Have they tortured you?" I said, "Let me see your hands. I want to make sure that he's not going to get beaten if he doesn't say what he's supposed to say." And Abu Masayef shows me all the stuff he was captured with, code books, pills, all this kind of stuff, communications. And I said, "Well, tell me a story." So he tells me a story, and he says he's part of a unit that was linked to the bombings, the apartment bombings, and they were sent to
In Moscow.
Chechnya to. Yeah, so there were four apartments that Putin blew up. He put sacks of explosives in the basement, and he lit them off, and it blew up. This is how he rationalized the invasion.
Yeah.
So he's telling me the story, and I'm like, "Oh shit!" Right? This is a guy who's telling me exactly what happened when the war started and what he was going to do here. And I said, "You look kind of nervous. You're kind of sweaty." So, "Oh, I've never been on CNN before." And I'm like, "Okay, but what you're telling me is kind of deadly information. It's you're basically fingering Putin for starting the war with these bombings, and you're saying you're down here to do the same thing." So,
yeah, his mission in Chechnya was more or less the same, to blow up civilian targets.
yeah, sabotage.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the catch was it was to blame it on the rebels.
Right.
So he was doing false flag stuff, right? And if you remember in Chechnya, there were groups cutting the heads off of British telecom workers. There was just a lot of weird stuff happening that didn't make sense, right? And it turned out that these people working for the GRU, which was Russian intelligence, to come up with something to generate anger and hate against the Chechens, because the Chechens had actually won an election. They were literally a separate country, and they wanted to join sort of Europe, and they had the OSCE monitor their election, et cetera, et cetera. So, I interviewed the leader, and, I did a good job of covering everything. The only thing is that nobody gave a shit, right? Because it was Chechnya, and that wasn't in the news. And in 2000, it was just like war in Europe didn't make sense. Like, why would there be? It's in Russia. I said, "No, it's not in Russia. It's in Europe, right? Look at a map." And so, anyways, so we had some hellacious experiences. I mean, I have never been in such close contact with explosives and tank units and, people fighting with Soviet-style weapons and whatever. And the other thing that was amazing to me was how corrupt the Russian army was. Like if you
Yeah.
wanted to cross lines, you needed to buy weapons or explosives. You go down to the market, you buy anything you want, and the Russians were selling all their weapons. So we had one prisoner named Valet. It's just this farm kid. I call them pumpkin heads. You know, these just farm kids from Siberia. They get conscripted. His shoes were spray painted black with paper tape on them, and he had to pay his commander money, or else he'd send him to the front lines. And so all the commanders make money off of the recruits. So at the end of the day, he defected to the Chechens because he didn't like the beatings and whatever. And there was just there's a lot of, you have to read, it's actually a story in a book, you know, Hunter Hammer in Heaven. But the picture I got was that this Russian military was just a giant, uncontrolled, corrupt monster that was there to make money, right? War was money. And so we were told, look, you got to leave. The Russians are surrounding Grozny. They're going to close the last road. So the guy that we've been staying with, the commander, he said, wait, before you go. He said, you know the problem with this place? People don't dance enough. So he does this little Chechen chicken dance. I don't know what it's called. And at the end of the dance, you know, they all fire their weapons in the air. And he said, okay, go. So we go, we run out of gas, right in the worst part, right? And so now they got to go back into town, get the gas, and then we go. So we managed to escape Grozny, and then we end up in I think it was Shali or whatever. And in Shali, we broke our axle. We had to pass this line of tanks. It's like literally right out of a movie. It was the most amazing thing. So we had a driver who was later involved in the Moscow theater thing, who was, I don't think he was insane. I think he was just like, do you want to go? Do you want to do it? I said, shit, let's do it. Okay. So there were a bunch of tanks advancing, Russian tanks, and there was a road that went straight across, right? And the road kind of went straight and it turned to the left. And he said, there's tanks coming there. We can make it to the village, but we have to go now. And if they see us, they'll fire at us, but we've been going too fast, so they won't hit us because they're tanks, right? And I said, okay, that's logic. And in the backseat of the Lada, there's no doors. So whatever you're doing, you're going to be in that car when you get hit. So he says, do you want to go? I said, let's go. So we go. And he starts accelerating. He's not driving with any lights, right? He's covering the choke light on the dash so that nobody can see it. And we get about, I don't know, 300 or 400 yards. And I'm sure you've seen magnesium flares, right? So all of a sudden, up in the sky, about 12 of these magnesium flares, and it's daylight. It's daylight. And we're hauling ass down this road, and we look over, and there's all these tanks, and they start shooting, and we're like, we're gonna die. We're gonna die. And he's, no, don't worry. So he keeps driving. He turns to the left, and yes, we didn't die. We end up in this village, and we have to wait because he broke his axle, and he's got to go get parts. And I hear this sound, boom, 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 and I'm thinking, wow, that's a good stereo. It's got a lot of bass and highs, and there's a lot of high. Like, so they don't want me to leave the house, but I go out of the house because I can't stand it. So I go over and I see what they call a zikr. It's a Shia, sorry, not Shia. It's a Sufi ceremony. When somebody dies, they go in a circle, and you might have seen some of these on YouTube where they add rock music or whatever. But it's all these men that just circle, and they do this kind of funny wobble dance. And some people do the bass parts, some people do the high parts, and they do it for hours. And it's an amazing sound, right? And we're being bombed. I should mention that we're being bombed by airplanes. So the way the Russians work is they have these spotter planes. And if they see like 4 or 5 people together, the silver plane kind of wave off. It's a propeller plane. And then you wait about, I don't know, 8, 10 minutes. And you start hearing, and you listen. Now, you don't hear the jet before it drops the bombs, but when they hit the afterburners and they go up. So being bombed randomly, you know, doesn't really matter. So I go up on a hill with these kids. And what we're doing for shits and giggles is that some artillery or tank thing is firing shells right over through the saddle of the hill where we're sitting, trying to destroy this cement factory. And you can actually hear the shells twisting as they come over our head and they go down there. And the kids say to me, oh, when the planes come, you wait till they drop the bombs. And if they're oval, you're okay. But if they're round, you run away. So we would sit there and the jet would come and it had 2 bombs and would release both at once, like 500 pounders. And the jet would go like, and then when it did that flash thing and it did the afterburner, you'd hear the sound and you'd look for the bombs. You're like, they're there. And it's like, I'm with kids they're like 10, 15 telling me this shit. They're like, okay, run. And it's like, oh, no, we're good. So I did that all day. And I thought to myself, either I'm fucked in the head or this is how the world works. Like, I don't know how to explain that kind of mentality where kids, I imagine in Gaza, right? They're probably the smartest kids on earth. They could probably teach Rangers how to survive munitions, but this was the reality of being in a place where these people were used to war.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got out. And again, an amazing sight. I don't want to tell you the whole book, but basically we had to go back up through a windy mountain pass, and they were firing Scud missiles into the mountains. And I saw these round rings of fire, and I'm like, what is that? What is that? It's like some nuclear thing, or what is it? I've never seen that before. And what it was were the pine trees. Every time they dropped one of these Scud missiles, it would burn like a ring. So we're driving through the smoke and these big, what do you call it, craters. Everything's on fire, and I'm like, oh God damn! You couldn't convey this in a film, right? You couldn't convey just the bizarreness of destruction. Anyway, so I got out and I actually bumped into the famous journalist that was going in, and I sat with her and I explained she got killed in Syria, and I explained to her like,
Are you talking
don't
about
wanna
the
do
French journalist?
Colville, Maria
Yeah,
Colville?
yeah.
And I explained about this and that. So she goes in and she wins some kind of Pulitzer Prize just describing how she escaped out of there. Like she tried to get in and she hauled ass out of there. So I want 12 Pulitzers for my book. So anyway, so that's just 3 months out of my life in late 2000.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing part of your book, and I think between the sheer amount of mayhem and the cast of characters that you come across in Grozny, it's just unreal.
Yeah.
Some other stuff to get into, man. When was South Sudan? When did that enter the picture for you?
Okay, so when they first started Vice, they're Canadian guys, right? And they had this deal with, I think, VH1 to do video. And so they called me up and they said, hey, you want to do video with us? And I said, well, that's kind of what I do now, right? And I said, well, how much does it pay? So we don't have any money. I'm like, so why would I do me for you for no money? Like I can just do me for money and not deal with you.
Right.
So they were big fans of the book. And you remember General Butt Naked was one of the
Charles Taylor?
first things they did. It came right out of my book, out of my chapter on Liberia, which is fine, they're very respectful. Anyway, so about 2013, I started getting all these calls like, hey, how do you get into Somalia? I said, I don't turn left at fucking year tree. I don't know. Like, why are you asking me how to get into Somalia? Like, well, we want to send a film crew. So what was happening was that Vice was setting up a news division and sort of a documentary division, and they were sending kids off to all these different wars, what I call child journalism, right?
Yeah,
And,
they hired a bunch of
Muslim-
heroin addicts out of Williamsburg.
Well, they were trying to do immersive. I mean, they're basically trying to do me. They were trying to do world's most dangerous places, right? And send an idiot to a war and see if he survives. And I said, look, it's all fun and games until you have to figure out how to ship a body home, right? You can get killed doing this, right? And not in very dramatic ways. I said, why don't you let me show you how it's done? And so I met with Rocco Castoro. I met with the guys there, and I said, look, why don't you have me I'll go to the world's most dangerous places. I'll film a rebel group that's never been filmed. I'll add in a storyline, a narrative, and I'll do not only the documentary, I'll write an entire issue of the magazine, and I'll do that within a month. And they're like, bullshit. And I said, well, watch me. So I found a guy who was a Costco manager, but he was a child soldier from South Sudan. And he wanted to go back and save South Sudan. And so I used that as my premise. And then I wrote an entire magazine or issue, it was about 40,000 words, on this obsession that Americans have with saving Africa, right? This kind of weird codependent enabling relationship. And I go through all the, Live Aid stuff and the wars and the whatever. It's very interesting, very well done. And we started our journey, and I'm filming it, everything, and nobody wants us to go in. So I ended up paying like 14 grand for someone with a plane just to drop us and leave us. They literally didn't even stop the engines. And I kept saying, okay, I need to get here, I need to get there. So I found Riek Machar. Now, Riek Machar, they just tried to kill him like a few weeks earlier, and he fled into the bush. So I was the first guy to do a video interview with Riek Machar, and Salva Kiir wanted to kill him. And what Riek Machar was doing was using these spiritual powers to summon what they call the White Army. It's a fascinating concept. And they're called the White Army because they rub burnt ashes on their face, and they're not really soldiers per se. They're sort of like spirituals and apparitions. So we keep getting closer and closer and closer. And now Riek Machar's got a PhD, right? He's this well-spoken man and whatever. And we have a great conversation, probably one of the best interviews I've ever done. And then I said, okay, I need to get into it. So he said, okay, well, go here, because the spirit has foretold that this is where the White Army will rise out of the swamps. And so our journey to get there is really interesting. But anyway, we get there. And it's brutal. I mean, I don't know if you've seen a guy with like 5 spears stuck up his ass, or a woman with her tits cut off and like knobbed in her head and arms. It's just like, oh my God, you people are fucking animals.
Yeah, war crimes are like off the charts from what people have told me about South Sudan.
Well, there was a guy that worked for Vice, and he called me up. He went into just a dead drunk, lock his door, don't come out. And he said, how do you do it? How do you do it? And I said, I don't know. I just film, right? I interview, I do it. And you got to remember, it's savage. It's savage. And anyway, the bottom line is that we filmed it. I'm somewhat careful not to film the most gruesome parts because it just turns people off. You know, my history of being around squashed and dead and blown up and screaming and murdered people is that if you take it too far, people's heads just go ding. You know, They can't, there's like a visor that flips. So I try to keep it soft. I try to keep it like, this is what's happening, just so the engagement level's there. So it freaks out my friend, right? And he doesn't tell me then, but I find out later that Riek Machar actually had his father killed. So this young man who I take there to save South Sudan is just like, all the PTSD comes back, all the trauma. And he's like, I'm out of here. This is bullshit. And I sort of narrate this thing like, okay, well, we tried, we went there, and now we're leaving, and there it is. And then I came back and I wrote the article. And then it took me like 6 months to get paid, which is the famous Vice story. But if you ever get,
that's just a journalism story, my friend.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm being a spoiled brat. But anyway, the bottom line is that I was really proud of that because using brevity, storylines, using, sort of, I don't know, investment journalism, whatever it's called, we covered a war, and we told a story, and we told the whole history of why that part of Africa always falls apart, what they're really fighting over. And you can Google it, like Saving South Sudan, Robert Young Pelton, Vice. You can watch it for free, and you can also read the chapters. They put that in for a Pulitzer, too. I also did a really nice piece on a jihadi, an American, Eric Haroun, who went to fight in Syria, got caught up in the Arab Spring. I don't know if you caught that.
No, not him.
Oh, incredible article. It's just, it'll make you cry. And there's something about Irish jihadis, like John Walker Lynn was an Irish jihadi, Akil Collins was an Irish jihadi, and Eric Haroun is an Irish jihadi. They're all gingers, right? And so Eric Haroun's story was fascinating. It was about a guy that wanted to get involved, and he went and he fought in Syria, and he got caught up with a bunch of ambushes and whatever, ended up with this group. He didn't quite know, was Ansar something, blah, blah, blah. And he did a video, and the State Department saw him and like, who the hell's that? He went into the embassy when he came out, and he went and talked. He said, I want to talk to the CIA. And like, no, you can't do that. So they kind of kicked him out, but they're like, wait, you're that kid, right? And so they laid a trap for him, and the FBI flew him back, wrestled him to the ground after interviewing him in a hotel, put him in solitary confinement, and he's on meds, by the way. He had some mental problems. And they just treated him like he was the bad guy, and he kept saying, I'm working for you. Like, I met with the guys with the Hawaiian shirts, telling them everything I was doing. Here's all my phone calls to my mother. And his parents were beside themselves. And I felt so bad because they don't understand that world, right? Why would their son want to kill himself and be a jihadi or whatever? And he fashioned himself as someone that was infiltrating these terrorist groups. Well, anyway, it turns out that the group he was with that he swore bayat to was not al-Nusra. It sounded like al-Nusra, but it was a different N-word, which you can read about. And they slap him on the wrist. They let him out. I go back for a final wrap-up interview because now he's a big celebrity at Vice. He's got a breathalyzer on a 500 horsepower BMW, right? He has to blow into a fucking tube to start this. And I'm like, oh man, you're gonna die, however you do it. His dad is really sweet. His mother's really sweet. His sister's sweet. And I get this call, and it's from his dad like a few weeks later. And I don't take the call because I'm busy doing something. And then he calls again. And he said, Eric's dead. He said he found him in a puddle of blood, like this huge puddle of blood. He doesn't understand why so much blood can come out of somebody. Apparently, Eric went and partied with some chick, and they bought some bad heroin, which either had rat poison in it or something, that makes you bleed out. And he was dead.
Shit.
And I'm like, holy shit. And the thing is, if you read that article in Vice, you'll cry. I mean, it's such a sad article because he wanted to do something and he didn't do it, right? And then you'll find that a lot of people come to me and say, hey, I want to do this, and how do I do that?
And I mean, Akil had a similar trajectory, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, Akil reached out to me because the CIA had given him my book. And he said, if you want to go to Chechnya, here, this guy, enjoy it. So he knew who I was. I didn't quite know who he was, right? Because one thing I didn't tell you when I told the Chechnya story is that I was with all these Chechen jihadis, and they were all dressed up like hockey players. They all shaved, and they all had like giant divots out of their face when they've been in the hospital. And they were told, just tell them you're a hockey team. And they all had the exact same sweater on, the exact same pants. Well, one of the guys said to Akil, your wife's in Turkey. She got out, and your child. Like, so if you want her, go back. Don't go to, he's like, no, I'm gonna go fight. Well, I found out later that Akil had numerous young wives and children all around the world. And he wanted to be a bounty hunter. So I taught him how to bounty hunt, and he wanted to do these cross-border grabs, which are tricky. You got to work with the authorities. Yeah, all that stuff is very tricky, but it's all legal, right? It's not like a Sergio Leone movie where they're shooting guns and running away. So he went and fixed up a car. He was trying to be me, like doing a documentary about what he was doing, right? So he put a 500 horsepower engine in this small pickup truck. He got all his gear, and he went down to the mountains of Mexico. And, if you've ever been in Mexico in a bad place, there's only one road in, there's only one road out. And everybody's just watching you, and they know you're coming in, and they know when you're leaving. So he goes in, he grabs this girl, he zip ties her. He starts driving out, and you can imagine what's going to happen. They block the road, and they've got all their weapons, and they say, okay, out, and untie her. They let the girl out of the way, and then they shot his girlfriend, right? Ba-bum, and they hit her right here in the clavicle. So she gets knocked down. Akil thinks she's dead, but I think Akil's scared shitless is what's happening. And so he starts running around. He's wearing all these fatigues and G.I. Joe shit, and he's filming himself, right? And he's got his AK, and he's like, okay, here I am, I'm on the run, blah, blah, blah. And he comes back, he tells me the story. And I'm like, that's stupid, dude. That's just stupid, stupid, stupid. Well, anyways, he starts coming up with this idea. Now, he's like one of these guys that you introduce him to somebody and they suddenly become his friends. So like Sebastian Younger, people that I had met suddenly were his friends. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he starts pitching them on this story that he's going to go back to this little village and kill everybody to revenge the murder of his girlfriend.
Very Chechen of him.
Yeah, and I'm like, journalism doesn't actually work that way. I mean, that was going to be the big story, right? And I said, I don't think it's a good idea. I just don't think it's a good idea. And he starts getting ready, and he's going to go down there, and he's like, you can't dissuade him, and he's going to write a story, blah, blah. He's going to be a journalist murderer. It was an interesting job title. And I get a phone call from his girlfriend, who's alive. She's in a hospital. She's scared shitless. I think she's Venezuela or something. And I'm like, Akil, your girlfriend's alive. Like, same story in Chechnya, right? Like, this thing that you'd planned is not going to happen. So he gets down there. He talks to the local fiscal or wherever he gets his weapon from. And he knows what's up. And so he gets busted before he can do any damage, right? And he's doing two things that you should never do in Mexico. One is kidnapping somebody, and the second one is having a firearm. For some reason, those are the two most severe laws you can break in Mexico, and he's guilty of both of them. So he gets tried and judged, he gets thrown in the slammer, and he starts reaching out to all the people in what I think called Black Flag Cafe, where all my fans hang out.
Yeah,
and
your
talk about
forum
this
back in the day.
And he's hitting each one up for like $100. Like, oh, my teeth are falling out. I got sepsis. If I don't have surgery, I'm gonna die. And they're beating me, and my leg is infected. So he got like all these people, plus women, by the way, sending him money. So I okay, look, I'm gonna go down there. I'm helping a guy with a documentary. I'm bounty hunting. I'm gonna interview you, okay? And I'll give you $1,000. I'm not aware of all this grifting, by the way. So I drive down to Monrovia, I go into the prison, and the motherfucker is in the infirmary. He's not in some like, Mexican prison. And even the prison is like a Motel 6. It's got drapes, mirrors, air conditioning, like you can get anything you want in a Mexican prison, including women, drugs, whatever. So he's living the life in the infirmary because they don't kill him, right? And he's with his wife. And I'm like, wait, you have another wife? And you're in, yeah, and he's got a kid on the way. And I'm like, Jesus.
Hoes in different area codes.
So I got this camera, I'm recording, and he tells this completely fictitious story about how he got there. Like he was hired to assassinate the mayor, and they caught him, and they're like, dude, I turned the camera, dude, stop, this is bullshit, right? He said, well, that's the truth. I said, no, I know what the truth is. So he tells me the truth, but the truth is not as interesting because he got caught, right? So I go back, and there's a woman who had called me and said, hey, if you see a kill, could you give him this package? And so I call her, I said, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to stop off and pick up the package, but he's fine. He's in the infirmary. He looks perfectly healthy. And he's there with his wife. And she goes, his wife? Yeah, his wife. I said, his wife? And I'm like, oh shit, he's got another wife in San Diego. I said, screw this guy, right? I'm out of here. And, maybe it's my fault because I'm trying to help people and I don't see the darkness or the scam or whatever. And that's when I found out about all the people sending the money. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. But yeah. And Jack Adema, right?
Yeah, of course. Jack died of AIDS down in Mexico, didn't he?
Oh, with pleasure. So I never met Jack Adema. I never talked to him. I
Oh,
never
really?
had any communication. No, I've only had one communication with him. As I said, if you don't stop messing with these women, I'll have somebody in your house within 48 hours. That's when I found him in Mexico, right? And he was always threatening everybody else. I mean, if you send him a letter, he would sue you, right? He would have his lawyer who was in his cahoots with him. And he had these weird little internet people that would attack you and make up stories and whatever. Not a drop, never touched. So you remember he wrote a book. The reason I know about Jack Adema is that I was with the Special Forces team in Afghanistan back in the early days. And I get back and there's this book by very famous author, Robin Moore, geez, Robin Moore, Green Berets, Happy Hooker. And he wrote this book, and this book's got a guy on the cover. And I'm like, okay, I don't know who that is. And I started reading it and I'm like, I'm in that book. And it's like, but who's this guy, Jack? Right? This is like completely fictitious. And I'm like, maybe that's like a story thing, right? Maybe that's some kind of thing they do to make it more interesting.
We should probably point out, Robert, that, to preface some of this, that Jack Adema, was involved in many things, including in Russia, and he had some brushes with the American intelligence community when he came back from Russia. I found out about that. But then, of course, in Afghanistan, he was running his own prison system off the books. Yeah. I shouldn't say off the books. He was just a vigilante, essentially.
He was scamming middle-aged women for money. So he would have that radio show or whatever it was. And then
mega
these women
stolen valor guy, yeah.
Yeah, oh, you're such a hero. And yeah, I'm being held down here. It's terrible. And I know the tribe that runs that prison. And I asked how much to kill him, right? And I then found out that he was hustling all these women. And I said, stop it, right? And I said, here, this is how much it costs to have you killed. And so he and I got along only through like these little memos that I would give to his friends to give to him. Well, anyway, so he got out and he disappeared, right? And it's, like you say, it's a very complicated story. It goes on and on and on. And I got to give the guy credit for just completely inventing things, and getting away with it. So he disappears, and this angry lesbian says something in some comment about this guy that's always fighting with her. And I read her and I say, "Who does this guy look like this?" He said, "Yeah, that's him, the bastard. You know, he always yells at my dog or this and that." So I start finding out about this guy. And I find out that not all these women that he was hustling money from, he's rotating them in Mexico, and he's giving them all HIV. So these poor women.
He hooked up with a pool boy. At least what I read or what I saw. There's actually a documentary on YouTube that somebody did interviewing Jack's wife, and all the horrible abuse she went through.
Penny.
Penny, yes.
So Penny and I know each other. Again, I've never met her, but we correspond, and I also helped the cameraman who was involved. It's a terrible story because he was working for CBS. He was friggin' working for CBS doing these jail things. Anyway, cut the story short. So he's infecting these women with HIV, and they're finding out too late. And he's living in this little house down there. And Penny escapes just by because he's beating her and all this kind of stuff. So I say, look, Jack, you are going to stop this, or I'll have somebody in your house within 48 hours. He's a dick, so I don't really pay attention to what he says. So I then have a friend of mine, and I say, okay, you're going to fly down to Mexico. You're going to go to this bar. You're going to wear like a OEF shirt or something, something that says Afghanistan on it, and just sit in this bar as long as it takes. So he flies down, he sits in this bar. Literally within minutes, the demo walks up, "Hey, bro, you're from Afghanistan, And he starts talking. And then Jack goes, "Hey, why don't you come back to my house for a few drinks?" And da-da-da-da. So he goes back into Jack's house. Now, my guy's doesn't know what he's like, this is much faster than he planned, right? And he's got to think about how to deliver this message, right? Which is basically, dude, I can get it inside your house, so don't do this. And suddenly the cops show up. And things get kind of crazy, and there's sirens and everything, and my guy's like, what the hell? His name is Jeff Shippey, passed on. And so my guy's like, I better get out of here, whatever. So he turns to Jack and he hits him, pushes him right here, right in the forehead, and said, "This is from Pelton." And Jack never left that house after that. He literally died in that house. So anyway, so it was effective. But we had the greatest scam in the world. So what we were going to do is we were involved in some bounty hunting thing in Cuba, right? And so we managed to meet the Cuban intelligence. And so we came up with this idea that we were going to hire Jack in a speedboat to pick up this person that we were going to kidnap, and that we needed guns. Bring guns, lots of guns, right? And we were going to then tell Cuban intelligence there's this crazy gringo trying to invade Cuba, and he's got all these guns. He's going to, and then they would have been in jail in Cuba for 20 years. So. But that never happened because he's dead. So,
these I love these stories, Robert, because they're so indicative. And if you're in this world, these stories are kind of typical. You run into these characters over and over and over again, and it reminds me so much of some of my own experiences that you inspired me to have, getting smuggled into Syria, and just the whole cast of characters that you meet. In some other parts of the world, it's exhilarating, the type of work that you do, and a lot of people maybe don't understand going off on your own. It's not embedded journalism. You're not embedding with the military. You're just going out there and doing it on the ground, and it's exhilarating, and it's exciting, but it is batshit. I mean, it is crazy. Come on,
it's not batshit because. You remember when they first had embeds in Iraq?
And a lot of them got killed, yeah.
They would go, well, no, but they would go to some small town paper and say, hey, we're going to make you a war correspondent. So you're going to take this NBC course. We're going to scare the hell out. And then you get to hang out with this 47th Latrine Cleaning Corps and, Fallujah or something like that. And they would come back and write these glowing stories. Well, I did one embed, at the request of the, God, I gotta think of his name. The guy's insane. This guy talked to me for 9 hours, broke his jaw at the 7th hour, and kept talking for 2 hours. But you can read the story. It's in National Geographic Adventure. But basically, they were going to do human terrain stuff. and I'm the human train guy, right? So I said, I love this. This is great. So I meet with this ranger who's a contemporary of Flynn. He just sells me. And I said, great, let's do it. And he said, okay, well, you can go. You can hang out. I said, fine, let's go. So they waited. I said, look, I'm going. I can't wait for this embed thing. And they, well, we're waiting for Oprah. We're waiting for this. They're like, no, I'm going. So I go there, and I basically inject myself into the military system. And I'm here to learn about the human train. And so at each step, they're like fumbling, like, oh, where's the paperwork? I don't see this. Like, we better like take him over here. So the first thing is I went to Bagram. They couldn't even find the human trains, right? Like, what's a human train?
You're talking about the human terrain teams?
Yeah. They were scientists that were going to go out, talk to Afghans, write up papers, and tell the commanders, like, don't do this because it pisses Afghans off, right? And they meant well, right? Because Petraeus, remember Petraeus was the thinking man's general. And
Yeah.
all this was going to be science, and they had some really good anthropologists who spoke the language, who tried to communicate the culture and the history.
And our boy Wayne Simmons, don't forget about him.
Yeah, and they ran out of those people very quickly, right? Very quickly. So they finally find the human train team, and they're in a tent, and the guy's name is Jones, and he's from Indiana. So I start calling him Dr. Jones, Indiana Jones, and he's this little guy, and he's the military component. And then there are the science components. And now these guys don't want to be anywhere near me, because one guy's like a Laotian language specialist or something. They're just cashing the check. They're making good money. They don't want to talk to me. And they're trying to think of a mission for me. Like, we got to stand up a mission. And anyway, to make the long story short, it's like one of those MASH things where you're trying to do something that doesn't exist, and it just gets worse and worse. So it turns out I ended up being an advisor to the 4-star, to McKiernan, right? And part of writing this article taught me, like, wow, this is not the way to do it. And you remember Flynn was a big fan of journalists being spies, or spies being journalists, or whatever you want to call it. So I worked with Mike Flynn. Yeah. So what happened was I pitched a plan called AFPACs, which was I would have 1,200 guys on the ground, locals, right? Pakistan, tribal areas, and Afghanistan. And we would be publishing to the continual stories, because we did it in Iraq as Iraq Slogger, right? So, part of my transition from being a journalist was to actually set up ground networks in wars that could be read and accessed by anyone. So in Afghanistan, they would drop a bomb on a village. And so the 1-star would say, oh, I got to leave now. And I say, why are you leaving? I said, well, I got to go to the head shed. And I said, well, stay. I'll call my guy in the village. I'll find out exactly where you dropped the bomb, what the guy's name is, what his phone number is, and where he is right now. He's like, you can do that? I said, yeah, that's what I do. So they started tasking us. And I said, no, we can't do that. We're just trying to sell you a subscription. And they wanted to give me $25 million to support, beef up this intelligence network. And they told me to start working immediately, right? So I didn't know anything about military contract. I didn't want to be a contractor. I said, look, we just want to publish things that everybody can access, NGOs, military, whatever. But we're happy to build in ways for you to read it, because a lot of those people didn't have access to like normal internet and things like that. They'd be Zipper and whatever, Zipper. And we had an incredibly robust network. So like we would do an interview with a terrorist leader, and they would send a spy plane over. And in the middle of the interview, the guy we were interviewing would get up, grab a PKM, lie on his back, and shoot at this plane. And I'm like, I know what you're doing. You're trying to be smarter than we are, right? Because you know that we are going to interview this guy, and you think that you're smarter than we are. I said, but we know where these people are. You don't. So we had a really interesting relationship. And, I wrote some PowerPoints, and I did there's a lot of interesting stuff about Arbakai and working with the tribes and who's who and what's what. And it was very well received, but every time we would educate somebody, and we used to have fun. We got to my ranch and, shoot guns and stuff like that. They would rotate that guy out. And then another guy would show up, and he thinks he's in Iraq. Let's kill these fucking Arabs. Let's do this. And I'm like, no, you're in Afghanistan. And this is a peacekeeping mission. And these are our friends. We're not killing them all. And start all from scratch, right? And by the time this guy was up to speed and really digging Afghanistan, he's gone too. So I had feelings about using logic and fact the military unit, because the guys from JSOC said that we were the best source of information, clean information, bar none. Like if you wanted to know something, it was true, it was real. Like you want to know somebody's phone number, we had it. So the point was, we got into a trap with Flynn because when Bo Bergdahl, walked off the base, we crossed the line because JSOC called us, what they call them, Task Force Virginia, I forget what they're called, but the spooky guys, right? And they needed to find him, and they needed to get assets up in the air, and they needed to mobilize people and whatever. So I said, sure. Where was he taken? So I called my guys and I said, okay, who's doing the kidnapping in that part, right? He said, oh, that's, Mullah Shithead, right? He said, okay. Call Mullah Shithead, ask him if he's doing something, where he's going, whatever. He said, yeah, you got this American. He sold him to Haqqani and then driving him on this road. And they're going to wait for the cars to come from Pakistan. They're going to take him because he just had an American, but he lost him. Remember the David Rhodes? And so Dewey Claridge's guys show up. And I'm like, and our guys saying, you need to work with these guys. They're the best. They're spies. I said, we're not spies. We're like us. We just walk around, we interview people, we publish what we do. We can't do spying. So after about a week of tracking exactly where Bergdahl was, watching him go all the way into Afghanistan to the specific building, we were told to wave off. And I said, what do you mean? It's an American, regardless of your opinion of this guy, it's like he's an American soldier. He needs to come back. And we can do that, right? We have the contacts, the ability, we have the knowledge, we have the people. Like, no, we need you to wave off. And that was the first time that I really sort of felt like the system is not set up for the soldier, it's set up for the commanders, because what I was to find out later on is that, they were trying to smash the hostile part with the peacekeeping part, so like whatever OEF was or whatever, into the ISAF part. And Flynn didn't want that. He wanted to run around and kill people. So by looking for Bergdahl, they were able to elevate their ROEs or whatever, even though we knew exactly where he was. He was in Pakistan. And I knew all those people in Miram Shah. I knew exactly where he was. And I knew why he was being held by Haqqani, et cetera, et cetera. And we could communicate with the Haqqanis. They didn't want that. And so then what happened was a series of fictional narratives started to pop up from Dewey Claridge's people about how he was teaching the Taliban how to shoot and he was doing this. And I'm like, bullshit, he's a kid in a cage, right? He's just being held because he's a chip, right? He's
an American citizen,
being held.
yeah.
Yeah, and he's worth X. So when they kidnap one of the Haqqanis, they're going to swap him for this guy. They don't care who he is. So this then leaked back into the American side of things, where you started watching Fox News and hearing these terrible things about what Bergdahl was doing. And I read those reports, and they used to start off like intelligence report, then they just kind of trailed off into gibberish, just like a bunch of stuff that they picked up, in the marketplace. And I was kind of angry, and I said, look, this is not right. Whatever's going on there is not right. So I went to the JAG and I said, something sucks here. Something is, because these people were forming companies and I just felt like something is happening. So a friend of mine wrote a book about it called American Cipher.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
he dug a lot deeper than I did, right? Because I just get pissed and I go off to another war, right? But he dug into it and he went into the whole, why this guy, why Bergdahl? How did Bergdahl become like a political weapon, right? Like
we have an early Team House episode with him all about it.
Okay, good. But, like people like Rick Brunell, I bump into him on a live shot and he's get up to talk bullshit about what Bergdahl was doing, and I'd confront him. I'd say, why are you saying that? It's not true, right? And well, my sources are better than yours. And I won't say it on the interview, but basically told him what I thought of him. But I could see people deliberately lying about this captured soldier. And again, I'm not a soldier. I have no military background, but I know if somebody goes down or somebody gets captured or somebody's in trouble, you get them out. Then you deal with whatever it is that got them into that mess, right? So I kind of left it behind, and this book, American Cipher, really lays it out nicely, and it shows how they used his predicament for both political reasons and also to keep their ROEs up or their rules of engagement. So anyway, so Afghanistan is kind of like the war nobody wants to talk about, but that was the thing. I used to go on TV all the time. I was on Fox all the time. talking about what's going on, why they're doing this.
If you could back up, I'd love to ask you about the early days in Afghanistan when you went in there with the special forces guys, and you were the guy that interviewed John Walker Lind when he was captured.
Right.
Can you tell us about what that experience was like?
So, so I've never been with American soldiers, right? I've always been with like rebels and crazy people and jihadis or whatever. So I wasn't that accustomed or familiar with what was going on, but I knew there was fighting going up in the hills there, right? So, I saw 9/11. I knew exactly what it was. I said, they got it right this time, right? Because they tried it before, and this time they got it right. And I said, damn. So I asked the commanders, I want to come over there. And so Dostum was the guy that I'd tried to see Dostum years earlier. I spent like 2 months in this little border town in Termez. And that was when the Taliban were attacking Dostum and Mazar Sharif in, I think, 2005. And he remembers me as the crazy guy trying to get in while he was trying to flee, right? And so he remembered me. And so he invited me, said, yeah, come. So I then started making my way into Afghanistan through Uzbekistan. And I entered, there weren't any journalists or anything like that. So, and I was hanging out at Dostum's house and everything. And I remember the night, it was when Qala-i-Jangi, I was like living right next to Qala-i-Jangi, a place called Kotabark. And Dostum shows up and he's pissed because the shit's going sideways, right? All these prisoners that showed up. And if you remember the 400 prisoners that just all Al-Qaeda guys and Pakistanis. So here I am like, hey, I'm here to hang out with you. And then like these soldiers walk in and they're looking at me like, who the fuck is this guy, right? Well, I meet them again when they're going in to get Mike Spann's body and they're in a truck. And one of the guys goes, you're that guy on TV. And I'm like, yeah, you got any more hats? And I'm like, yeah, I got more hats. So I hand out these hats. And Bill Bennett, who's now got killed in Iraq, was just so excited to, like, his favorite TV show guy was there. And they were going into Qala-i-Jangi at night. And that was when I forget the name of the SEAL that went in with the SBS. But so they suddenly realized, like, oh my God, there's a friggin' journalist here from National Geographic, CNN, Discovery, and we're on a secret mission. So we made friends. They lived in a little house outside of Dostum's place, but I was with Dostum, and I was with two mullahs. They're part of the government now, but Mullah Nuri and Mullah Faisal were like my bunk mates or whatever. And I read their book. I read Mark's book. We became good friends, of course. But
you're talking about You're talking
Mark
about
Nudge.
Yeah, Mark Nucci.
Yeah. And so these guys were like, it was such a bizarre concept that every time Dostum went out, like I was in the lead car with Dostum and they were following along. And they were trying to do secret stuff, but eventually, like Bill says, like, he knows more about Afghanistan than we do. Like, we just arrived, right? This guy knows his way around, right? And we became very good friends, right? And they let me film them. And then I read Mark's book where whoever the top guy was kept saying, get rid of that guy, get rid of that guy, get rid of that guy. And they're like, yeah, fuck it, this guy's cool. We're going to hang out with him. So when I was with those guys, we formed a very tight bond, right? As you do in combat with people. And I saw the pressures they were under. It wasn't just the fighting stuff. It was the bullshit from the up above, right? They had to report back on these little things like, what are you doing? What's happening? Oh, are we winning? There was all kinds of infighting. But I saw something that I wish every American saw. I saw Americans liberating Afghanistan after the Taliban were kicked out. Mm-hmm. And, things were really bad in the north, right? And cheering, crying, throwing money. I mean, they loved America. I mean, Americans and Afghans are very similar, believe it or not, the cowboy thing, right? And this was a perfect story that hadn't been written yet. And what happened was, it wasn't supposed to work that way. It was supposed to be the Tajiks in the Panjshir that were supposed to win. They were going to go in, but they're smart enough. They were draining all the money out of the CIA, right? But up north, we had this incredible battle, right? Qala-i-Jangi was amazing. I watched that thing and I walked around. I got brains all over my shoes, and it was an amazing battle. And the SPS guys were amazing. The whole idea of this battle was amazing. And when these guys, when it sunk in that they were part of history, they said to me, they're going to steal our story, Robert. They're going to steal our story. And these are regular guys, right? You know, from the Midwest, wives, kids. They're kind of senior guys in SF. And they're very honest, nice people. And I said, well, I'll write your story. I'll write your story. And, but it's your story, right? You know, if I do your story, it's your story and everybody benefits, you know. And they got yanked out to see Rumsfeld and they were pissed because Rumsfeld wanted like to get a photo op and all that kind of crap. And there's almost like senile Robin Moore sitting there like, okay, I will sit down, I'm gonna write this book. And they were told, talk to this person. And they're like, no. Their story is very simple. There were 12 guys sent in to figure something out, work with local indigs, if you want to call them that, help them any way they can, get out of their way, and make them appreciate that America's here to fight beside you for your freedom, right? And in doing that, Dostum was like quoting Abraham Lincoln, like in the speeches. I mean, we won, right? We won, right? But the State Department and the agency, like, oh no, we can't have Dostum in charge because he worked with the Soviets, right? And all the intel on Dostum comes from Pakistani intel, right? From the ISI. So they immediately started creating this weird story about these container murders.
Yeah.
And I was in the fucking prison when the containers were arriving. I literally, my room was there. So I just happened to be in all the right places at all the right times. So the trucks would drive by and they would drop these prisoners off. And I used to count all the prisoners coming off and I talked to the Red Cross guys and they would tell me why this guy died, you know, dysentery. And remember, these guys had been chased for like a month. You know, they're all big gaping wounds. They got cholera, dysentery, all this kind of stuff. They're in really bad shape. But I'm walking around that prison talking to these guys. They don't have a guard or anything like that. And the story starts leaking out that there was a bunch of guys in containers and they were all machine gunned and they were starving or they were sweating. And it's like, it's freezing, it's snowing, right? It's like, they put them in the containers because they were driving right by Qala-i-Jangi and they didn't want these jihadis jumping out and joining the fight. And they didn't want them to freeze to death because they're wearing little shalwar kameez, right? And it made perfect sense that they were in these containers. Now, there were some that were suffocated because they jammed them tight or whatever, but there weren't SF soldiers firing guns into the container and blood pouring out and laughing.
Which is what John Walker Lind accuses them of.
Not really. Like Lind was in a different convoy, right? So they had to go to Kunduz to pick up all these prisoners, right? But what I'm saying is that the news media started getting fed these ideas that there was a war crime.
Yeah.
Every journalist looked at a war crime, right? And it was very similar to what happened in Mazar in 2005 when they put people in containers, like the Talibs that lost and people, they actually did put them in containers, but it was 80 degrees because it was July, right? And they did suffocate and they did die. But this story got all mishmashed. And so these journalists showed up and I'm like, who are you? And, oh, I'm from this and I'm that. And well, I was there, you know, I was in the prison. I counted all the bodies. I interviewed all the prisoners. Like, we don't want to talk to you. And Newsweek did a story, New York Times did it, Carlotta Gall did a story. And I'm like, where are these people getting this information from? And it was a group of Afghans who they used to blur their faces and whatever. And I thought, wow, they're going to burn these guys. They're going to burn this SF team and they're going to burn Dostum. And my you know, I call them my guys. They're not my guys, but the team couldn't talk, right? They can't go on the media and say that's bullshit. You know, we were here, we were there. I said, I was with them all the time, like day in, day out. I got photographs, I got video, I got everything. Like if they were off doing something bad, I would have known about it, right? So that was another very disappointing experience for me after seeing such an amazing, I mean, in terms of military campaigns, you know, the guys didn't fight on horseback, you know, but the Afghans did. And a lot of Afghans lost their lives.
Well, where did those stories about war crimes originate from then?
Well, the Pashtuns had been displaced by Dostum, right? So there's little pockets of Pashtuns up there, and they were pissed, and they were going to get back at Dostum. So they would start talking to journalists saying, bah, 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 bah. Completely unfounded, right? And this was to build on this idea that Dostum was this bloodthirsty ogre. I mean, one guy said that he was sitting interviewing Dostum while they were tearing a prisoner and skinning him alive. And it's like, no, it's a peacock, dude. Like he has peacocks. And Dostum wouldn't take this stuff seriously, right? And I said, this is not good. This is whatever they're doing here. It's like an avalanche of bad. It's the same thing with Bergdahl, right? It's just this avalanche of weird, incorrect, false, defamatory stuff. is basically they don't want you in the government.
Right.
You know, you're the military power. You know how to work jirgas. You're the one that brought all the ethnic minorities together. You're the guy that's got links back to Turkey. You guys, you know, they don't want you. They want some puppet, like they want a door guy like Karzai to do the nasty. So at the end of the day, we kind of screwed the Afghans, you know, by putting in Karzai, creating a centralized government and pretending like, oh, royalty. Yeah, well, yeah, he should rule Afghanistan because that's how it's done. And they're like, no, dude, we used to be socialists. We, you know, we spent 20 years as socialists, not as royalty. And we did the same thing in Iran as well, right? We just did the exact wrong thing. But at the end of the day, I saw how this thing worked out, and it didn't work out the way it should have, right? We should have let these people form their own government, and we should have hoofed it.
Tell us about, before we move on, I got to ask you about John Walker Lind and how that interview came about, how you crossed paths with him.
Sure. So remember I told you I was right by Qala-i-Jangi, right? I used to watch the bombs come in and the bullets coming out.
Where Mike Spann was killed during the uprising.
Yeah, no, I never met Mike Spann. I mean, I was there when they were going to get his body, but that uprising happened like the day before. So there were 400 people originally that went into the Qala-i-Jangi, which is it's an old 1898 Vauban fort, like it's half of a cavalry place and half of an office. So they put these guys in there. About half of those people were jihadis, like about 250 were actually Arabs from bin Laden's camps. And the rest were just Pakistanis, they didn't give a shit. So when the first grenades were thrown, they shoved them down into the pink building, right? And it's actually a bomb shelter. Like it was built as a bomb shelter because it's got these really heavy slats of concrete. But down below, there's like 4 rooms and a big room, right at the back. So all the Arabs went into the back, right? And they had these grenades around their nuts, right? So they had shoelaces and they all were carrying grenades. And the idea was that they were gonna, when they opened the door, they were gonna come out and blow up whoever was out there, and they were gonna grab guns and they was gonna start. And they were talking all night. Now, Lind was obviously an Arabic speaker. He didn't speak Farsi or Pashto. So he would have been part of that conversation, or at least known of that conversation. And in the morning, when they started bringing them up, they began with the Pakistanis. And then when the Uzbeks had to come up, they know they weren't going home. They started blowing themselves up. And that's when it started. So Lind was in the line of people, right? And so when Spann came out with, I forget the linguist, what's his name?
David Tyson.
David, yeah. So when they came out, they did this funny thing like, does anybody here speak English? And they're like, oh, the Irish guy does. And so they dragged out Lind. And they're like, you know, you saw that video, right? And what are you doing here? Blah, blah, blah. They played tough cop, tough cop. And then he didn't say anything, he went back in line. And when the fighting started, a bunch of guys went into the basement. And so I went there the day that it opened up. There were still bodies everywhere, and there were about 250 bodies left. And I said to Dostum, I said, bring those asshole Talibs with us, right? Maybe they can talk to the guys in the basement. So we brought the Talibs with us, and they're like, oh, we don't know those people. They don't speak our language, you know, they're Arabs. So I said to Dostum, you know, I might know some of those people. So when they come up, let me know, and I'll interview them, right? So I don't know how long they're in that basement for. So I get a banging on the gate. I'm staying with the SF guys in the palace there, whatever it's called. Go outside, and there's 2 trucks and all these like shivering guys, and they're all wearing corduroy jackets. And I'm like, why are they all wearing corduroy jackets? Because the UN gave it to them, right? But there's a truck with all kinds of smashed and screaming and bleeding people in there. And at the time, Lind's in the back, right? And there's guys with like, you know, sucking chest wounds, and there's a dead guy over here, and they're screaming, they're broken legs. And so I'm talking to some of these guys, and so I started pulling some guys out, not the wounded ones, but the guys that weren't wounded. And they thought I was going to kill them. So I said, okay, look, this is just a little too tense. Take them to the hospital, and we'll sort it out there. So they took him to the hospital. And then about, I don't know, an hour after that, one of Dostum's guys comes running over and said, there's an American there. Now I'm thinking, well, maybe that's Mike Spann. Maybe that's like an SF guy. I don't know. So I go to grab my camera, and the guy says, well, why don't you bring something for me? He's one of your countrymen, isn't he? I said, yeah, you're right. Good idea. So I bring some cookies and stuff like that. So I go there, and the hospital, it just stinks, right? It's really cold out, but it's just got this little stove, and there's just the stench coming out of these people, and they're all comatose, they're all half dead. And I'm filming it all. You probably saw it in my video. But there's a guy in the back, he's whacking this guy in the head, saying, "What is your name? What is your name?" And I said, so it's this guy, and I say, let me ask the questions, doctor. So I start talking to him, and I start filming him. He doesn't want to be filmed, but I say, well, tough shit, I'm filming you. And my goal at that time was like, I need to get this guy on tape because he's going to disappear. If he's an American and he's with jihadis, he's not going to be around in a week or so. So I asked Bill to come with me. He's the medic. And what are we going to do? So we figure, let's get him upstairs. Let's get him upstairs and get him stabilized and figure out if he's wounded or whatever. So we take him upstairs, and I let Bill do his thing. He's a medic. He's got his Mr. DP hat on. And so he's kind of feeling him. Now, he's hypothermic. Like, Linda's hypothermic, and he hasn't slept for days. So I'm talking to him, and I'm just keeping him awake, and he's pissed at me, and he's like, "No, you cannot film me." And I asked, "What's your parents' name? Give me your parents' name." He's like, "If I want to talk to my parents, I'll talk to the Red Cross." There's no Red Cross here. You're in a hospital. So we give him some Hespan, right? And Hespan is just fluid that goes into your veins, and it rehydrates you. And he kind of comes alive, and he hears me asking him questions about jihad and camps and the 055 Brigade, and he figures like, oh, are you one of them, right? Because why do you know all these names and these numbers? And so then I do my interview for an hour, right? And I talk to him. And I go back to my room. Actually, no, we take him back. He comes back with us, and he sleeps in one of the guys' beds. And then in the morning, in his little jammies, they take him off to the CIA. And that's when his life becomes miserable. But when I was with him, he was doing fine. So I called CNN. I said, I just did an interview with an American who was in the basement of Qala-i-Jangi. And they go, yeah, sure. I said, no, not only that, he's a jihadi and he was trained by bin Laden. He's at his camps at Farouk. And they're like, yeah, sure, click. I said, okay. So then Newsweek does this little thing where they interviewed him for like 2 seconds on the back of a truck. And CNN calls me back and says, is it that guy? I said, yeah. So I send him like a minute of tape. And back in those days, you did it frame by frame and like dial up internet. So take all night, send this thing. And again, I'm not in America. This is December 1st, right? So, but the main thing is that this is an American telling people that he's a jihadi. He came here for this. It's exactly what he wanted. And you like basically go screw yourself, right? And to me, it's my second Irish jihadi because I've already met and interviewed at Kiel. So I kept saying to him, you're going to disappear. Like if you don't reach out to your parents or do something, you're gone, right? And he didn't care. So that story became a big story, but I wasn't here, right? And they wanted me to drive to Kabul to do live shots. I'm like, no, I'm having fun here. I'm hanging out with my Green Beret guys, and we're going to do shit, blow stuff up. So then I was filming all this stuff. So anyway, after about a month, I come out of Afghanistan because the guys are gone. It's no fun. It's just soldiers everywhere that don't know anybody or anything. And I get to CNN headquarters in London, and they like keep me up all night. And I just want to go home for Christmas, right? I was just like, I've been in Afghanistan for over a month, and it's like, I just want to go home. But they make me do these live shots, like 24 hours straight. And half of them are criticizing me for being like a terrorist lover because I said something about jihad, and that's like, I must be a terrorist. And the other half is like, wow, what an amazing scoop, right? Like, how the hell did you do that? And I said, well, I'm there, right? I'm just in the middle of things. Well, anyway, I get them to book me a ticket home. And one of the editors is looking at my tapes, and he goes, what are all these soldiers? And I said, those are special forces guys. I said, those special forces? I said, yeah. I said, you've got tape of that? And I said, yeah. And I had no idea the impact, like in America, about these secret, green beanies running around. And they canceled my flight home. I'm like, no, I'm not cutting anything. I'm not telling anybody anything. I'm not doing any story unless I clear it with the guys, right? And so I said, I'm going out for a coffee, and I just went straight to the airport and flew home. And I think they still tell that story at CNN, but I was done, like I wanted to go home. Anyway, that story then got stolen by multiple people. And I would get calls to go into Hollywood to meet with guys, and I'm like, aren't you some goofy actor that's like 6'6", and aren't you some scientist? What the hell do you have to do with this story? I said, have you talked to the guys? Have you cleared it with them? And the story is really cool. It's about these guys fighting the top and the bottom, right? It's like classic, team of 12 guys being told to do this. And they're like, screw you, we're going to run this war the way we want it. And it's like, it's a monument to 12 experienced, decent guys doing exactly the right thing and no drama, right? And then the State Department comes in and just fucks it up, and we're there for 20 years, right? And nobody can figure out how we got here and how we get out of here. And I'm like,
and so
stay on the ground.
As an addendum, John Walker Lind was just recently released from prison, wasn't he?
Yeah. So the sad part about John Walker Lind is I told him, look, you're kind of a dick, but I'm going to go and I'm going to call your parents and I'm going to tell you how they found you, what condition you were in, because I just want to let them know that we did the right thing, right? And that whatever the CIA does to them is none of my business, right? So I called his mother every day for a month. I said to her, I interviewed your son. I just want to let you know the conditions and whatever. Never called me back. Then I got a call back from her assistant saying, well, she's very busy. She doesn't have time for this and whatever. And then the next day I saw that she did a piece in the San Francisco thing about how she loves her lawyer, Brosnan or whatever. And I'm like, fuck these people. So I just was like, I'm out of here. And then Brosnan calls me and he starts threatening me. And I said, you don't want me to get me involved in this case. You don't, like, of all the people on this planet, you do not want me testifying as to what John Walker Lind is. He's a member of Al-Qaeda. He's not a member of the Taliban. And I can tell you with great specificity and expertise that he went there to kill people and that he's exactly the guy that should be in Gitmo. He's exactly the guy that should be hung at dawn, blah, blah, blah. And I said, but you don't want me on that trial. So he gets into it, right? And I'm like, okay. So all the guys, all the SF guys get subpoenaed and we're all sitting in a hotel the day before he does a plea deal, right? Now remember, he's the only guy. Like Yasser Hamdi was another American there. They just let him go, right? So I told Brosnan, I said, I really don't think you want me involved in this trial because I don't hate the guy. I have to tell the truth. Well, anyways, he took a plea deal for 20 years. Terrible, terrible decision, right? And I don't know. He got out of prison. Everybody called me like, oh, what do you got to say about the guy? I said, he's just another dumb jihadi I bumped into, right? Just another guy trying to do something stupid that got caught and paid the price. I said, talk to the guys that are like smudge marks on walls. They'll tell you the same story. They want to go die for Allah, Anyway, so I didn't really invest myself. I never wrote a book about it. I didn't really get involved in his life or trial. They've interviewed me on some documentaries and stuff like that, but he's just a kid that did a dumb thing.
It's wild. Just another wild interlude in your career there, Robert. Before we get on to some of the more recent stuff, do you want to talk about the Philippines at all?
The Philippines? You talking about the show?
Well, I mean, you told me that you had a Philippine story when we spoke earlier.
Oh, I was just saying that when I got my Discovery contract to do a series of specials on dangerous places, I said, well, where do we start? So I wanted to start with a big bang. So I went to the Philippines and I did 2 world exclusive interviews, one with the guy that killed the special forces guy, the small guy, Nilo, whatever his name was, killed the guy they named, McCall, there's a building there they named after him.
Oh, is this the guy who's killed in the bombing?
No, he's an assassin, like the motorcycle assassin.
Oh shit, you're talking about Nick Rowe.
Yeah, Nick Rowe, right. So
that was way back. That was in the 80s.
Right. Well, I'm a way back guy, but the point is that this is the guy that did it. In other words, and everybody's looking for him.
He's a Sparrow team, yeah.
Yeah. So then I went up to the north to do the first interview of this communist rebel group on the Negros Islands.
The NPA.
And they take me up to the mountains, and then we get attacked by special forces as I'm filming these guys, and then I do. Just a bunch of, I go out to the Spratlys, all this kind of stuff. And the only point I want to make about the Philippines is that one show that I did for Discovery, there's like a whole year's worth of scoops and like never before seen interviews and whatever. And then the second one was Masood, right? The second one was my journey to meet Masood. And again, it's a great documentary. And you see me stranded at the top of a mountain pass, and I go see the Taliban, I go see Masood, I interview him. And those things didn't have any relevance until 9/11, right?
Yeah.
So I did these in the late 90s. I did another one in Liberia. I went, remember I was telling you about the lurid rebels? I went in and surrounded by Charles Taylor. It was a really gruesome thing. I did sort of a three-parter on Chechnya, kidnapped, and something else. And I did Colombia. I did a great. So Outside Magazine called me up and said, "Oh man, you got to write for us. You do good stuff. We're going to have this stuff, this adventure stuff." And then they called me back and said, "No, we got a better idea. We're going to write about you." And I said, "Yeah, so that way I got to do the same shit, but then I don't get paid, right? Is that what you're saying?" So they hired Tim Cahill. And I didn't know this at the time, but I have two reputations, right? I have a reputation as a guy who just makes shit up, never does any of this stuff, and it's not possible, blah, blah, blah. And I have a reputation for people that work in this business is like, if you get in trouble, call Pelton, right? Like this guy knows people, he knows how to get in and out, whatever. So Cahill was assigned to sort of poke a hole in my reputation as the danger guy. Because you remember, there's a whole group of people like, "Oh, this guy goes to war zones on his vacations. It must be bullshit," right? So I give him a choice. I say, "Where do you want to go, Tim?" And Tim's a great writer, by the way. He writes funny stuff and he does adventure, but not the same kind of adventure. I said, "You want to go to Grozny? You want to go here?" He said, "Well, I speak Spanish. What about Colombia?" I said, "Great, let's do Colombia." I said, "I'll take you to meet all the rebel leaders. We'll go hang out with the police, the Marines. We'll go out and do all kinds of crazy stuff." So we go down there and I interview every leader of the FARC, It'd never been done before. And we go out drinking with Mono Hohoy, who's the deadly guy. And we're drinking shit. And he's looking at my Mr. DP logo, and they're Marxists, right? And he wears a little beret. And we're talking shit. And I said something like, "Don't pump that Marxist sunshine up my ass." And my translator didn't want to translate it. But he said, "Robert, I think we should go now. And then we were drinking Mirinda and vodka, absolute vodka. And he's like, "How'd you like to stay here for a long time? How'd you like to stay here for a very long time?" And my
like in a tiger cage?
It wasn't working out well, because once they start drinking, it turns into an asshole. Anyway, he's dead now. So we did that, and already Cahill's like, "Holy shit, was that a world scoop that we just did?" And we did another one. We went to see the death squads, but they wouldn't talk to me because they're busy killing people. But we got some footage of them. And then we did this thing about the pipe bomb. They put a pipe bomb around a woman's neck that they detonated. And we went out with the Marines trolling for FARC. And so we come back, and Cahill writes this very funny, glowing piece about this guy, in the 2 weeks I was with him, did all these stories that any New York Times guy would kill for him. And he made fun of me, and the guy that made fun of me turned out to be a very good friend of mine. But the point is that I had a certain point there of being celebritized, which I don't like. I don't like to be sort of written about as somebody who's famous. I'd rather just look at my stuff, you can talk to me, but it's not like I'm trying to be famous. And I then began commuting to war zones, literally back home, change your clothes, kiss the wife, kiss the dog, off, horrendous things. And I needed that decompression time, right? And as you know, PTSD and all these things are very serious things for exposure to intense violence, stress. And I'd get home and I'd be kind of, snappy and angry or whatever. But I realized I had to take at least a week off people weren't trying to kill me. Like a car backfire was not like a shot from somebody and whatever. But I started to not like it that much. You go war after war after war, and they're all telling you the same thing. Where's America? Why isn't the UN saving us? It's because nobody gives a shit about your war. That's why I'm here. If I show up, nobody gives a shit about your war. So I then thought, how can I use this skill in a more productive way? And that's when I started creating ground networks, right? So Easton Jordan, who got fired, quit CNN, whatever. I had gone to him and said, why don't we do a thing with the locals? Instead of flying in all these good looking guys with poofy hair and putting them up in hotels, why don't we just hire the guys that they hire to get the stories? And I'll hire a bunch of PhDs and Arabists and whatever to do the editing and the fact checking. So we did this thing called Iraq Slogger. And I don't know if you actually read it or saw it, but it was like your hometown newspaper, but it was Iraq, right? So we made some money, and then I did it in Afghanistan, and then I got burnt in Afghanistan because they wanted me to become a spy, right? And to kind of work within this disinfo, because the best thing to fuck up is the good stuff, right? Like if you trust somebody and you start injecting bullshit in there, then that's what they want. And I couldn't do that. And Flynn actually told me to set up a company under another name. He'd give me $10 million, and they start throwing me contracts. And I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And so I got pissed. So I went to Somalia and I set up Somalia Report, which was about 700 people reporting. I used to go in all the pirate towns, and I was with the old EO guys up there in Puntland. And then I started working at MOAS, and that was a ship that rescued migrants off the coast of Libya. And I built that charity up. I brought all the journalists in, got them up and running, and that thing was fully funded by the Red Cross, but it was also becoming like an expressway for migrants to get to Europe, right? Because there were like 12 ships that were picking migrants up, and they literally had their locations, the migrants had their locations programmed on these GPSs. So, right now I focus on books. I'm still writing the SF book, and I was waiting for Mark and those guys to write their book, Robert. And I'm doing a documentary about a really wacky period during the Trump administration, where Jared Kushner had this secret $1 billion slush fund to do all these weird coups and all these sort of regime changes, like in Jordan, Libya, the fake tanker attacks off of Fujairah. And I stumbled across this because, once again, people call me up and they tell me things and they want to know what the hell that is. And I got all this from a hack of Jared Kushner's iPhone 7. And I've been working on this for 4 years now, right? And it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think I'm more into these complex stories that show how things work at the highest level. And, Libya is one of my favorite countries because they go out and fight the war during the day, and then they solve all the problems of the world at night, right? And they never actually sleep. But it's a beautiful country, but people want that country because it's got so much oil and it's so close to Europe or whatever. So you remember that whole Opus thing that the UN tripped over. Well, that was my entree because Kobus, who I think you know Kobus Claessens?
I don't know him personally. I know who he is.
Oh, well, he's a good friend of mine. And he called me up when I was in Libya saying, my friend signed on for this crazy mission to take over some oil refinery, and they're all going to get killed. It's going really badly. And that's literally a couple of days before they got in those rafts and went all the way to Malta and disappeared, right? So I've been spending the last 4 years chasing down that story. And that's going to be a wild one. So it'll be a book and a documentary.
I'd love to hear you expound a bit on that when you talk about $1 million slush fund. I mean, where did the money come from? Under what authorizations was this done?
Well, it came from MBZ's personal account. So you remember when they began the White House, there were a lot of foreign entities showing up at Trump Tower. They were pitching whatever they wanted to pitch. There were Russians, there were Saudis, there were Emiratis. And Trump's not a very sophisticated guy when it comes to foreign policy, and he brought in Steve Bannon. He also brought in Jared Kushner. But Jared Kushner was just an advisor. He didn't have a cabinet. He didn't have a budget. He didn't have any operating funds. So he was busy cooking up things with MBS and MBZ. And they began to recreate the old Iran-Contra model. You remember there was a business model that was created that would patch the gap when the CIA was denied funding in the 80s. So that model was instituted, and there were a bunch of people pitching, like, private CIAs, Venezuela coups, blah, blah, blah. And they were open for business on that, as long as somebody else paid for them. So, I don't want to give away too much, except to say that this did happen. And the things that Jared's doing in the Balkans now, I spent a month in Serbia interviewing people about the previous one that was done with Mohammed Dahlan, where, again, government-owned property becomes privatized, outside investors comes in, UAE money comes in, and it's a way to flow money to those leaders of that country. It also benefits the country to a certain degree.
I mean,
but we're seeing this.
The thing I have to ask, I mean, Iran-Contra, of course, took place against the backdrop of the Cold War and fighting the Soviet Union. This construct that you're describing, is that merely for personal enrichment, or is there some other objective there?
No, there is a Cold War. So if you look at Arab Spring in 2010-ish, 2011, 2012, you had a populist uprising saying, why are families running countries? Why is one family in charge of every resource that comes out of the ground? And this movement began in Egypt, and it also has like tendrils in terrorist groups and things like that. But it's basically socialist revamping of Arab structures, tribal structures. And these guys, the leaders, realized that how tenuous their hold was on the wealth and the oil and the control of those countries, because they don't have good armies. They don't have military infrastructures. They have to use mercenaries. And that then began, we don't see it because we don't care, right? But you watch how Arab Spring started toppling leaders and creating democracies. They started untoppling those people and putting in strongmen all across North Africa, right? You see the same program in Africa where you're seeing all these coups. Well, they're engineered by other countries who go in, they do analysis, same thing they did with Cambridge Analytica, like who's who, what's what, who could be the leader, who could overthrow this guy. And they destabilize them and they turn them into sort of strongmen things, which means you deal with one guy, one family. You bring in Russian mercenaries, you give them money, you give them loans, you give them banking, money laundering, whatever, you get contracts for assets. It's a very simple sort of colonial 18th to 17th century idea. And this is all part of what they call the 1922 plan, which is something that Tanoon cooked up. And this was a way to make sure that families could run these, what's the right word, kingdoms, without being disturbed by socialist or populist uprisings, by just basically pushing out the safety barrier and making sure that strongmen, and this is what this war you're seeing in Sudan, right? The war in Libya, is they're reconstructing, they're fracking the colonial system in Africa and North Africa and the Middle East. And it's also part of what you're seeing in Gaza and Israel. It is much easier to deal with a strongman where you just make one phone call, you write one check. Now, they were doing that with Trump, in the Trump administration. They were saying, we want to do this. Russia wants this, UAE wants this, KSA wants that. Okay, we'll do that if you do this, right? Saudi Arabia, you want a security agreement, you need to buy X billions of dollars worth of weapons. So we don't see it as much because it's a little bit more complex, a little bit more historical, but that is proceeding now. And that's why we're seeing what they call the illiberal democracy, like in Hungary. That's why you see Orban at CPAC, right? What's Orban got to do with CPAC, right? Well, these are vassal states or proxies of Russia who are re-engineering the politics so that you can vote. It just doesn't matter who you vote for. But these people are aligned with sort of what they call the multipolar world, where there is no one U.S. structure. So we're getting too deep into politics, but when you write a 1,000-page book, you start learning things, in the aggregate.
But I mean, the way you kind of describe it is that it really is sort of a globalist mentality in the sense that it's really not about Russia or America.
Right. Well, one family, See, the world is full of transnational entities, like the Roman Catholic Church, right? It's a transnational entity. It has influence over millions of people. Russia seeks to do the same thing with oligarchs, and they have control over, energy. They have control over countries. We used to practice that a lot more, like in Latin America and places where we just replace the leader because we don't like him. But China and the Gulf states are pushing back because they have to turn money into political influence. And Saudi Arabia is a fascinating country, as is the UAE. They can become orphans very quickly. Under Obama, we didn't want to talk to them. We wanted Arab Spring to take over and kick these people out because we wanted to deal with democracies, but in an Arab tribal structure, it's really hard to have a democracy that functions smoothly, right? So they've begun reversing that process, putting in strongmen, coups in Burkina Faso, the Janjaweed leader Hemeti, Haftar in Libya, so on and so forth. And they're global engineers. They engineered these things to happen so they can then go in and invest. And what they're buying are distressed goods. So if you overthrow a country, you screw up the infrastructure, there's a gold mine that doesn't work, better we take over and run it than Al-Qaeda, right? And you're seeing this throughout the Sahel, in the Sahara, where there's only a resource, there's no country, there's a resource, there's a bunch of people that live in a city, and different groups take over these resources. I spent a lot of time in Chad, right, in that area in Central Africa, and they're fighting over artisanal mines, which we don't even care about. But one artisanal mine can supply tons of gold, over a year. And if you control them, you have a transnational business, which is like a state. So you remember Coney, right? I did that thing to find Coney. And I've been tracking Coney since the mid-90s, right? So about 3 months ago, I reconfirmed what Coney was. I got a picture of his kid. I knew exactly what village he was in. And he runs a militia. He works with Al-Qaeda and ADF, the guys that put a bomb under my table in Uganda. And they guard artisanal mines. And they're fighting against Wagner, who was trying to grab all these artisanal mines for the UAE. And we were going to set up a deal where Coney was going to come in and we were going to talk about working together and blah, 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 setting up a PMC, which would have been a great book ending, right? Or whatever. And they didn't, the militia that I worked with in Chad had no idea there was a $5 million reward for Coney. And the Russians had no idea there was a $5 million reward. Now, it's not that easy to get, right? Like a Russian can't walk up and say, give me $5 million. But in their heads, in their African heads, Russian African heads, they're like, oh, find Coney, get $5 million. Okay, let's do it. So they had a firefight and they chased him off. So now I got to go find Coney again. The point is that we don't see those transnational lines, right? So when you talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, there are lines that flow through Turkey, through Qatar, through these small countries and large countries. And then you see the sort of the UAE rat line, and they're slowly expanding their influence throughout Africa and then following it with investments. And I will say this without jeopardizing it, that we are also now finally involved in that PMC thing that I warned about in License to Kill. We are now using corporations to extend security, military intelligence, logistics into Africa that don't look like the military. But if the military needs to use those resources, this is a very 60s concept, by the way, it's not new. They can avail themselves of those logistics and resources, do what they have to do, and then get out.
That's pretty wild. But we're seeing these things happen. We see these global events, and I think you're right that there's at least some sort of transnational discipline that needs to be looked at, rather than just looking at these countries in piecemeal.
It's hard for us. Americans are not good with history, and they don't, like when you talk about Hamas, for example. Most Americans can't tell you how Hamas was created, right? It was created because we screwed up. Like you remember, Mohammed Dakhlan was running Fatah. And they were basically a security apparatus in Gaza that worked with the U.S. and Israel to keep the lid on. And they kept the lid on a little too tight. And Fatah got kicked out, and then Hamas came in. But Hamas barely got elected, right? It was not a popular movement at all. And then Netanyahu became tasking Hamas as a way to drive division between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Gaza. So they were cooking like in a kettle. They were cooking Gaza. And then when Kushner and the UAE and this sort of Abraham Accords set out from the beginning to create this pressure cooker, because there was no Palestine in any peace deal that was ever written. The secret, which I'll go into in my book, is, in my documentary, is that there was supposed to be a coup to take out the King of Jordan. And he was going to install somebody who was going to slice off a giant chunk of Jordan to create the new Palestinian homeland. But the king very wisely was like, no, you're not doing that. So he's managed to be tipped off 3 times by the agency on coup attempts. And the last one was in 2021. The first one was 2017.
There's those weird movements within the royal family, people being arrested or moved around.
Yeah, and by the way, the King of Jordan is very solid. Like he's got a great security apparatus, and he is let's just say that something goes on in his country, we make sure that he knows about it
The
and
GID.
he hears about it. So the point is that we had one agenda within the Trump administration, and we had another agenda within what you want to call deep state, right? Slow rolling stuff, tipping people off, doing whatever. That will probably be revealed in the next 6 months. That we've been working hard. When I say we, the nameless, faceless people that do security have been revamping how we do business and how we deal with African elements and North African problems.
But I mean, the way you describe it, I mean, is this a function of the United States government, or rather is this a function of Jared Kushner enabling the UAE sort of like outward facing, as an outward facing maritime nation?
So the answer is very simple. So there are professionals who, have extremely high IQs, very smart, come out of special operations, that come up with solutions for things, right? And those were being enacted at the highest level. And then you have people inside the White House who have a completely different agenda, and nothing to do with American security, basically selling us out, whether it's Bannon or Kushner or whatever. They're trying to cut deals with bad people, Russians, Emiratis, Saudis, whatever. And then you have the middle sort of military just trying to deal with what crisis are we dealing with today? Are we fighting World War II in Russia, or are we doing counterterrorism in the Philippines or whatever? And we just seem to be reactive, right? So there are people doing strategic stuff, and there's people being reactive, and then there's people that get elected. And if you saw Johnson for 6 months, Speaker Johnson, block aid to Ukraine, right?
Yes.
To me, I get it. 70% of that money goes right back into American pockets, right?
Through foreign
Whether it's some
sales.
small town that makes HIMARS, whether it's the artillery shell factories we're building. And it's a lesson to any country that don't tread on us, don't invade countries because we'll push back, right? So when someone that is elected at that level, was he third or fourth for the presidency, basically gives a solid to Putin, I think there's something inherently wrong with our government. I mean, there's something really, really wrong. And I don't know why he thinks that way. I don't know why he supports Russia. I just think that all the guys that go out at night and kill people and drop bombs, and these guys that are like trying to defend us from bad people are let down by that, And we do have skin in the game.
I have to ask you too, since we're here and we've come up on this topic, how does Erik Prince dovetail with all of this?
Well, I can't talk about Erik Prince, but if you have Google, you'll find out more than you need to know. I wrote a book about PMCs, right? I wrote a book about numerous companies and also mercenaries, and how this new structure fits in to how people move faster and more efficiently. And it is happening, right? I mean, if we want to support a country in a time of war, we're going to use private military companies. They may not be manpower, they may be logistics, they may be this or whatever. And I think Erik was at the forefront of that. He saw that need, and it exploded during Iraq because we needed a lot of everything right now. And the question is execution. So as we get into this, there's a whole bunch of like funny sounding companies that are doing huge things in Africa, right? And underneath these contracts are like 5 million petty cash. Look at the ISR contracts where they can take money of any color. Like there's just a lot of money that was designed for counterterrorism and counter narcotics being shoved into this new PMC structure. So I feel good about that. I don't feel good about our foreign policy, in which it's like jerked back and forth by special interest donations, right? And so that's my concern right now, is that I could write another 1,000-page book on how things work and what to do and how to solve them. But if some guy gets elected from some state and he gets some dosh to block something or to say something stupid, and people die in Ukraine, and keep in mind, I was in Ukraine. I went to all the front lines, and I get the tonality, the importance, the intensity of that war. And it's an attritional war. So any shell that goes out, you need another shell to replace that, right? And then you need a bunch of shells behind that. And we're now fighting a World War I battle in World War III, and it depends on manufacturing and keeping logistics flowing, right? So a 6-month gap is almost unthinkable.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're there. I mean, it's happened.
But we don't talk about it. That's what I'm saying is right now, it's 1936, and we're trying to gear up for a major conflict that requires factories humming at full capacity 24/7 to generate weapons of war. And we're just sort of going like, well, why are we giving money to Ukraine? Why don't we just give it to Russia? It's like Putin's old. This is his last play, right? And I was in Grozny in 1999 and 2000, and I saw the early Putin, right? I knew exactly what he's trying to do. And he's not going to stop. He's not going to stop at Ukraine. He's going to keep going as far as he can, right? All the way to the sea. So, and he's already attacking this country anyways with what they call hybrid warfare, right? You know, he's degrading the quality of our relationships with each other. He's degrading the quality of our political structure. So I see the world being much more dangerous, even though there's less wars.
Right, that there's like a greater potential for it to really go hot.
Right, and I wasn't around in the 30s. I wasn't around at the turn of the century before World War I, but every major conflict is usually preceded by a sense of calm, a sense of like everything's wonderful. And then you find one or two people who take advantage of that, who start kicking over nations, who start stealing resources, who start saying, well, are you going to eat that? Because I'm going to take that, right? And I could bore you to death with like high level strategy stuff, but
well, it's
countries
the
like
it's
the
the
U-
couple months after the Archduke Ferdinand gets assassinated.
right, and they call these black swan events, right? And we're resilient, right? The world is resilient. So you could close off the Suez Canal and people still get their, you know, plastic Nintendo things or whatever. But we saw that with the food shortage, with the war in Ukraine, that it affected food. We saw how the fuel was affected in Europe, and we had to react quickly. We see how everything costs more. But we're at the stage now where we're actually watching live every day on TV people getting murdered, right? When you watch the war in Ukraine, and it's like a ding, 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 ding. It's like a pinball game, right? We killed 500, they killed 500. And this is all done with manufacturing and technology and weapons. So my feeling is if everybody could go to the front lines in Ukraine, where it looks just like America, you know, they look like us, they talk like us, different language, you'd see the severity of what's happening.
So, is there any date? Do we have any? When can we see this documentary? When's it coming?
We watched it. I'm 3/4 of the way through, so I'm not going to give you a date because that's my artistic prerogative. But I just say this: things are unfolding now in D.C. with grand juries, all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to time it to those things, right? And I'm very smug about this. But I've been working on it for 4 years. I've been all over the world, been talking to hundreds of people, and it's a great story. It's a very interesting story because it shows you how badly our government can be hijacked by a few individuals and what happens afterwards. And is it a happy ending? That's really the big question, isn't it?
Right.
But I still, even with that grim sounding old guy statement, I still want to believe that I can communicate the sense of joy and accomplishment in going out there and experiencing those conflicts, you know, putting things together in your head by seeing, feeling, touching, talking, or whatever. And I feel, and this is an old guy statement, that we're losing that, even though we have more communication tools. Like this morning, I watched some guy run around the drones chasing him. Like, but I'm not in Ukraine. I don't know what that's like. But I've been to Ukraine and I know the impact of those things. But do people see things beyond electronic communications, right? Do we invest in movements and ideas? Do we travel halfway around the world to understand the way certain people live, whether it's, you know, tribes in the jungle or whether it's mercenaries fighting wars, to really invest in the world, right? So that when somebody says, oh, that's a terrible thing, we can say, no, that's just an NGO with another one of those goddamn press releases about everybody starving. Or like, no, that's a big thing, right? That's a real thing. So I feel that I've got a PhD in that. Like when I get upset, everybody should get upset. When I say don't worry, everybody should not worry. But I do say we should worry about the sense of the Ukraine war has got nothing to do with us. It's some regional conflict, and it won't affect us in the long run. It will. And I've seen countries fall in Africa. You know, I've been in Libya, and all these places where it used to be a democracy and it fell apart. It used to be a dictatorship and now it's a military coup. Like, what's going on here? And who are these people? And why are they sending mercenaries? Because they can't hire local people to do their bidding. So things are changing.
Robert, you had told me the other day about, we talked a little bit about how back in the 1800s, there were these like memoirs published of these adventurers. There was people like Jim Corbett, the tiger hunter. Who are some of your favorites, Robert? I'm trying to think.
I like
names.
Sir Richard Burton. I mean,
Yeah.
If you want to read something, read the life story of Richard Francis Burton. He was an iconoclast, right? There's a series of books. If you go into the Gutenberg Press, like these are free, right? These are on the internet. I read a story about an American that was held as a slave in Tripoli for like 5 years, right? It's a great story, and it's in the 1800s, and it's like, what's it like to be a slave and an American? And
That's crazy.
there's who's the guy that scouting on 2 continents? I'll think of his name in a second here. A little short guy who inspired Lord Baden-Powell to do the Boy Scouts and create the world's first boy soldiers. The stories he tells are very sort of military deadpan, but they're like, oh my God, can you imagine that, right? And he was in the Wild West, and he was in South Africa in the Boer War. So all I'm saying is that if you Google European mercenary, right?
Yeah.
Even on Wikipedia, if you're lazy, you'll find some of the most amazing people that went to India to fight for the Maharajas, right? I'll tell you what, I'll make it simple for you. Go out today and buy the Flashman series, by any book by George MacDonald. And before he died, I had a friend of mine say, look, when you die, can I take over the series? Because I love this series. It's about an incredibly cowardly, good-looking, tall guy who blunders through history. Like he's in the Custer's Last Stand. He leads the charge of the Light Brigade. He runs a slaver into West Africa, and he meets all these famous people, right? And it's written in such a pithy, like, real style. Like, the guy does a lot of research on it. So anyways, Flashman, George MacDonald Fraser is a great series. And then, like I say, start with Wikipedia. Almost every one of these Italian or French or German mercenaries has written a story about fighting with elephants in the Khyber Pass or whatever. It's crazy shit.
Yeah, there are great books out there about like the Hessian mercenary state or about the Swiss mercenaries and their relationship with France. I have a book around here somewhere. I think it's called "Serving Under 14 Flags." This guy who's a professional mercenary in the 1800s.
So there's 3 kinds of books. There's a book by a guy who didn't intend to do it, but he went somewhere and he did something crazy, right?
And now he's old. And
then there's books by people who just happen to be in amazing historical events. And then there's the guys that bullshit, that want to be that guy, and they're always telling you did this. I have one of my favorite guys is Jack Wheeler, whose dad was a TV host in Los Angeles in the 50s. And he became a professional adventurer. He's a nice guy. He has a PhD in psychology or something, or philosophy. And he was tasked by the Reagan administration to basically invent a bunch of insurgencies. And if you ever get the chance, Google Jamboree and Jamba, which was in Angola. And he brought these people together with Jack Abramoff, and they created this sort of gathering of, rebel groups that were going to fight against the Russians and the Soviets and whatever. And Khalifa Haftar is one of those guys because he's the Libyan Contra. Like, he was in jail most of the time, but he was touted as the Libyan Contra. And he went back and he now runs the east side of Libya. So I'm just saying that there's some contemporary adventure stories of people who started off doing something adventurous that caught the imagination of somebody, and then they got elevated into something that's now actually real. And I can't not stop laughing when I travel around the world and people tell me about the TV guy that runs our country. And I say, what do you mean? You mean Trump? I said, yeah, because they know all the reruns of The Apprentice worldwide. Like, that's why he's so famous, right? Because he's a TV guy. And they don't view him as being like a guy who makes foreign policy or was a president. He's the TV guy that runs America.
Well, Robert, it's apropos, the West African church up above us is getting very holy right now. Getting very holy right now. But I refuse to believe that there aren't any more adventures to be had, and that's this sort of writing that we've been speaking about. Can you find it today? Like, who's your go-to? Where do you go to?
I'm not a good reader. I write books. I spend my time writing. So I don't know. What do you think? There's a bunch of people that have written stories kind of like I used to write. I don't know that there's many people that just like disappear into a war, right? And come back later. I'd have to think. And most of those people contact me as they say, how do you get into this place, example of how things have changed, like the Darien Gap is now like a PR spot for people talking about migrants. When I went on it, everybody had been kidnapped the time before that we went. So the world is changing. There's more security. There's more people trying to stop you. But
there's a couple books out there by people who served like in the YPG in Syria or Azov in Ukraine.
Yeah. There's a bunch of people people do documentaries now. They don't really write books that much because it's
or do podcasts.
Or podcasts, yes, which is a terrible thing to do for a living.
I know.
I'm going to be doing a podcast, and I hope to interview those people because I honestly haven't been home that much.
Tell us about that, Robert. Tell us, because you showed me, kind of the preview that you have of it.
Yeah. So I know so many people, and I know so many things about so many people, that I thought that what I should do is centered around the idea of adventure, right? When I say adventure, I mean education, exploration, whatever. Help people understand how people went from what they were told to do to what they ended up doing and whether they feel satisfied. So for example, I'm going to spend a weekend in a cabin with Rick Prado, right? And Rick just wrote a book about his time in the CIA.
A guest on this show also?
Yeah, of course. And Rick lived in the shadows for many years, and now he's out promoting stuff. So I'm going to design a knife for him. And I want him to talk about more than just what's in his book, about what you get from doing things. And I want to do interviews. I want to do sort of talk and speak and spell about like how you do bribes, how you sneak across borders, how things work, and hopefully generate some interest in I call them young people, right? On just going for it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I went to my 15-year-old grandson and I pitched the idea of my podcast to him. And I said, what do you think? And he said, that's stupid. I'm like, why is that stupid? It was adventure is like overrated. It's like so 90s. And I'm like, no, you mean like skateboarding, like that's not adventure, that's danger, right? And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm just going to end up being some like sad version of some MTV show where everybody hurts themselves every day. But it's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about taking the things that bring you joy and the thing that gives you purpose and pushing it as far as you can go, right? Now, I talk about distance, right? So I travel and I go into places that are strange and you're forced to learn languages and culture. But I mean, you can do it here in America. I used to hitchhike around America and travel on a motorcycle and whatever, and it's always fascinating. But that little mechanism is what used to be part of being a man. So if you remember, of course you don't remember because we weren't alive then, but when an African tribe takes a young man, he has to go out and kill a lion, right? When a Native American comes of age, he has to like starve himself and go out in the woods and look for a spirit animal, right? There's a process that you go through. In America, it used to be the Marine Corps or something, but there's a process you go through when you transition from a boy to a man that usually involves mentors that guides you into your new persona, your new challenge, your new life, your new self-image. And I think that's missing today. I think there's a lot of people that are selling that. Yeah. It's like, look at me, be like me. But I'd like people to look at me and say, that motherfucker's still alive. Like that guy must know something that's worth listening to. So that's what I want to do in my podcast.
There's a great memoir written by Tim Bax, who is a Selous scout. And he grew up, I believe, in Zambia, actually. But just referencing what you were bringing up there, he talks about how he had a job as a logger in Canada, I believe it was. And he had to go underneath the logs underwater with a cable to attach it so that the logs can be pulled out. And a guy had drowned doing exactly that job the day before, and now here he is, like 17, 18, like, okay, go do it. And he was like, that was the day I left my childhood behind and became a man, right?
Well, I used to log, it's called choking. I used to do that, and I used to work in the tunnels, the 36-inch tunnels. And I'm 6'4", so I had to go in there with a rock drill. It's like 8 feet long. And I'd have to drill a pattern. I'd bring the explosives down, and I'd put all the primer in the explosives, and I'd wire them up, bring them up to the top, and the blaster would go boom like that. And then I have to go back down and dig all that rock out. So I used to do those jobs, but I don't think they bring you, I think they cause alcoholism more than anything else. I don't think they bring profound, and you know, I was a logger. I worked in the bush, and I really enjoyed it. But what I'm talking about is I wrote a book called Raven. It's the only fiction book I've ever written, and you can see it on Amazon. And I wrote it for my grandkids. So if 2 people buy it, I'm happy, right? But the idea was, what thinking process is different as a man than as a child, right? And the difference is, as a child, you're told what to do. You're told what to learn. You're given things, and you're supposed to absorb them. As a man, you have to learn things on your own. You have to observe and listen and talk and experience and try. And then you have to form a standard of quality that drives you forward in your education. And I love learning. I mean, I basically have a high school degree before I lived in a car. Every day I learn something new. Every day I watch YouTube videos, I read things, I practice things, whether it's air conditioning or farming or aviations or weapons or whatever, politics. And I'm saying that I don't dictate this, but I'm trying to lead people to this path, that when you have a child and it has to learn how to do things, it's missing so many tools today. And how many times people say, well, I don't know how to do taxes. I don't know how to balance a check. I don't know how to fix a carburetor. Like, I didn't even know how to plug in electric cars. Like, because nobody taught me. I have to go to a YouTube video. And I'm just saying that there's a lot more interesting things to learn as a young man. And if you get it right, you'll always be a kid. Like I always say, protect your inner child, right? I always think that William Shatner, who just did a documentary, he's 90 years old, 93 years old. I don't know how he does it, but he's got curiosity. He's like, everything is funny and fascinating, right? If you can engender that in people, they'll survive, right? And, you know, I've talked to prisoners in like people held by the Viet Cong and whatever, and I've talked to all kinds of people. How do you keep alive in a situation where you can't even move, right? And it's this survival thing comes from that process, is training your brain to always think positive, always learn, always, you know, ingest and digest. So anyway, that's what I want to do in my podcast.
I also have to bring up DPX gear. I don't have my knife with me. You sent me a couple of them, and I've been using, I've gave one to D, our producer, and the other one I've been using for like 2 months now. It's great, man. I hope people go check it out. Where can people find DPX gear?
DPXgear.com, but I'm gonna school you now. So that knife I sent you, I designed for Billy Waugh, okay? And Billy Waugh and I go way back, right? And Billy's kind of thought it was funny that I'd be hanging out with all bin Laden's people and the Taliban while he was busy trying to kill him, right? And I said, let's do something together. So I used to give him knives. He used to teach covert operations in clandestine. So he used to give out DPX knives, because I started doing this, creating DPX gear for SF guys that were handed shit when they went out there. And Billy Waugh, I said, what knife did you have when you were out in Cambodia in the jungles? And he said, well, I had this little crappy demo knife, and I had this parang, and I had this old, like, World War II, you know, stabbing knife. And he used to stab people in the throat, like, pop, 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 and run away. And he had this parang. So I said, look, let me design knives that I wish you had back then. And I'll put your name on it. And he said, why would somebody want a knife with my name on it? Because it's cool. So that knife I gave you is the reimagining of the demo knife. You know, the little shitty Swiss Army knife they used to give people? And he used to use that to do debt and everything. So I put that hook on it, and it's a beautiful knife. It's probably one of the finest knives that you'll buy ever. And that's the point, right? I didn't make a knife to make a knife. I wanted to honor Billy, and who's gone now. And that's what I do for fun, is DPX gear.
It's awesome. And when can we expect to see the podcast?
God, you're a nag. You're really
I know.
a nag.
I am. I'm pushing product too, though. We got wares to sell here, Robert.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I got to rack up about 10 of them, and I got to find a bunch of reprobates that'll want to sit with me for an hour or so. And then I got to edit it all together. So, I'm about 2 or 3 months out. It's
Okay.
close. It's close.
Okay. Well, can you share what a couple of the episodes are about?
No, I'm not going to tell you because it's based on my book, The World's Most Dangerous Places. So first of all, it's about dangerous places, how to survive them, right? Secondly, it's about people who work in dangerous places, who learn shit because hopefully they're still alive when I interview them. So they can tell you things that they learned in dangerous places, and maybe you'll get some sort of world wisdom from it, right?
All right, Robert, keep your secrets. Keep your secrets. No, I'd love to have you back on again because we kind of just scratched the surface of your work and your life and everything you've got going on now. I want to let folks know that on Monday we have Eric Deming, former Navy SEAL, coming on the show, and then on Friday Pat O'Donnell, who just wrote a book. I don't know if it's released yet or not, but he wrote a book about special operations during the American Civil War. So we're going to have him on to talk about that. Robert, where can people find you? Where should they go looking for you?
So I have a website called Come Back Alive, which I just updated actually. So comebackalive.com. You can Google me, I'm just all over Google like stink on shit. And you can read all kinds of stories that I've written. You can see all kinds of videos. I'm usually gone, I'm usually someplace else. But with this podcast, I want to sort of bring it on home, right? Because I'm not antisocial. I'm just busy all the time. So I want to give back sort of some of the ideas and thoughts and philosophy. And if everybody says that's a bunch of bullshit, man, then I'll just move on to something else. But right now, writing books, doing documentaries. And like I said, I want to try to mentor through podcasts because I can't go around and pat everybody on the head and say, no, don't do that. But I want to do the podcast and I want it to be organic. So I want when people feedback saying, well, stop talking about this, talk about that. And I don't mean any deference by this, but we have been saturated in war for many, many years, right? And since 9/11 onwards, it's just we've been saturated with images of death and sadness and whatever. And we have a Generation Z or whatever you want to call them, the kids coming up that are just immune to that, right? And I don't even know if they have any emotions because every young person I talk to has zero interest in going into Rhodesia and fighting for the Selous Scouts and, or jumping out of helicopter. It's just gone. That whole thing's gone.
Yeah, if you trust what the news says, they don't like to drink, they don't like to smoke, they don't like to fuck.
Right.
What's going on?
They're just on the internet watching YouTube. So I'll give you an example. So I took my daughter, I have identical twin daughters. And I took my daughter, Claire, out to the Q course. And I do some things in Q course, like role playing and stuff like that sometimes. Because I wanted her to meet SF guys. I wanted her to meet really polite, hardworking, decent people. And I have them over. Sometimes they use my house as like a secret when they do those secret black helicopter shit, and we have barbecues and stuff like that. And I just am so impressed with special forces and the way that they train them, the way they conduct their selections. And I've seen maybe the best, I could be wrong, but I mean, I'm probably saw the best example of 12 Americans, almost like Rogers Rangers, like left alone to do their thing. They do it right. They just kind of shrug their shoulders and they move on. And I'd like to perpetuate that somehow with, these talks, these conversations. And again, I'm not military, right? So I bow down to anybody that served in the military and put up with that bullshit, but it's something you have to do to make this country, right?
Yeah.
And they would never allow me in the military because I would just never follow any orders. But the guys I know that put in 25 years, master sergeants, everything's broken, smashed and whatever. I just want to give them some time to say thanks and look, kids, be like that when you grow up,
Yeah.
So anyway.
That's awesome. Well, Robert, thank you so much for doing the show. I hope to have you. I do want to have you back again. Maybe when your documentary comes out and you're doing a little push for that.
I'll use you to plug my stuff from now on. I'm like, okay, here's my 10-minute sales pitch.
No. I'm going to squeeze a whole podcast episode out of you when it comes out.
Cheap labor. Well, I'm doing interviews again because I've been busy doing this documentary. I've been everywhere all the time. So I'm back sort of running my mouth again. And it's always a pleasure talking to you and people that understand kind of what I do. And at the same time, I feel like I'm like the the guy in the museum that the kids point at and say, "What's that, mommy? What is it? Adventure? What does that do?" Like, what? I don't know if there are any adventurers left. Just me with my mustache. So, anyway, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for doing it, Robert. Go check out
All right.
his books. You can find them all on Amazon. Like I said, these were kind of like foundational works for me that as a teenager reading this book in particular actually, inspired me to travel and really colored a lot of the things I did in my life. And I think a lot of other people are in the same boat, man.
Hey, you know what I found out is that people use those to pick up chicks.
Really? I didn't know that was a
Yeah, they go on
possibility.
They would have this really thumbed copy of the world's most dangerous places, and they would carry it on their commutes. And girls would walk up and say, "Oh, what's that book?" And then boom, it was over. It was like having a puppy, right, in a
I'm
park.
such a dumbass. I never even thought of that.
Oh, I didn't know that either. So anyway,
Jack's gonna start bringing it to the park with him.
Walking around with
Yeah.
this bad boy.
under their arm. Well, you do become some of the most distinct people when you say, "Oh, yes, of course, I can't talk about what I do in dangerous places." But I never experienced the joy of being famous for writing that book. I'm always gone. So when people tell me stories, I'm always fascinated. Or when I see something on social media where somebody goes, "Oh my God, I read this book, The Adventurous," and big hearts on it and stuff like that. So that's kind of cool.
It's awesome, man. It definitely had
Okay.
an impact on impressionable young minds. Robert, again, thanks for doing this. We'll have you on again sometime in the near future. And for everyone out there, we will see you on Monday with Eric Deming and then on Friday with Pat O'Donnell. So thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the show.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to sign off now. Maybe next time we'll do it in like 4K or something.
We'll try.
Figure my stuff.
Yeah,
Figure my stuff.
or in studio if you're coming through New York.
Well, I'd be happy to. I'm going to Blade Show in Atlanta, so I won't be. I'll be hanging out there with what's his name, Rick.
All right. Yeah, let us know when you're
right.
coming through.
All right, later.
All right, guys. See you later.